In November 2024, as the night sky entered its clear final cycle of the year, telescopes stretching from the Atacama Desert to Hawaii to the icy Alps simultaneously sent back a strange signal. At first, it was only a faint speck in the sea of stars, a fragile streak of light blending into countless other fragments of cosmic debris. But within just a few hours, that speck of light was confirmed to carry a hyperbolic trajectory, one that did not belong to any celestial body of the solar system. A temporary name appeared on the data screens, 3I divided by Atlas. The news spread faster than light in the human imagination. Scientists were no longer confined to their laboratories. They simultaneously shared charts, images, and data across the global web. Social media timelines turned into a storm. Could this be the third interstellar visitor in human history? Something not born of the sun, something that had never been bound by its halo of gravity, was heading straight into our domain. The shock no longer belonged only to the astronomical community. It spilled into the lives of ordinary people, those who happened to catch a science bulletin on the radio, children staring at computer screens in classrooms, drivers who pulled over at rest stops to read the flashing headline on their phones. New interstellar object detected, a journey with no return. In that instant, humanity seemed to draw the same hurried breath. We were not simply witnessing another comet, but a fragment of some distant universe, flying across the endless void to arrive here. The James Webb Space Telescope immediately adjusted its gaze. AI systems designed to forecast orbits capable of analyzing millions of scenarios kept spitting out unstable results. Atlas's path did not fit any known model. This realization sent research centers into an atmosphere both overwhelmed and tense. They began to understand they were standing before something unclassifiable, a traveler from a distant star, perhaps hundreds of light years away. In Paris, a philosophy professor convened a midnight discussion, asking students, if a guest arrives from beyond the borders of our solar system, can we still believe that humanity is the center of the universe? In New York, CNN ran endless reconstructed footage, a hazy block of ice and dust plunging toward Mars. And in Tokyo, thousands gathered in Yoyogi Park, standing silently beneath the sky, straining to find a new point of light among the familiar river of the Milky Way. Never before had human curiosity been awakened with such intensity. Scientific excitement was no longer the privilege of researchers. It had become the common pulse of humankind. People no longer asked merely, "What is this?" but rather, "What will we learn from it?" Could it carry the answers to our very origins? That night, when the data first confirmed, 3I divided by Atlas carried an interstellar orbit, the entire world seemed to share a single heartbeat, stunned by its own smallness, trembling with hope that, in this fleeting moment, humanity had brushed its fingers against a hidden doorway of the universe. If the moment of Atlas's discovery left the world stunned, then only a few days later, new data transformed that shock into a seismic tremor of knowledge. The object's brightness did not fade as predicted, it kept rising, far surpassing every model. The graphs on the screens, designed to capture the slow changes of a comet, became useless. Forecast curves shattered, turning into cliffs as if Atlas itself were taunting humanity. You think you understand the laws? Look at me. In laboratories, the atmosphere shifted unmistakably. The initial astonishment had given way to a volatile mixture: fear, fascination, and a ravenous hunger to understand. Hundreds of research teams immediately launched cross-time zone conferences. Scientists from the US, Japan, Germany, and India shared their data. Each brought a fragment of the puzzle, yet the more fragments appeared, the more incomprehensible the picture became. Atlas swelled larger, shone brighter, and strangest of all, its tail did not stretch away from the sun, but pointed the other way. On the media front, 3D renderings spread like wildfire. Simulation videos on YouTube, TikTok, and Weibo pulled in millions of views within hours. But beneath that thin layer of spectacle, the public began to sense a deeper truth. Atlas was not just a stray shard of icy rock. It was a reminder that the universe carries laws we have never touched. People stopped asking whether it would pass close to Earth. They began asking what it carried within. In Cambridge, a group of physics students put forward a wild hypothesis. Perhaps Atlas was not entirely natural, but a constructed object, a derelict ship from an alien civilization disguised beneath frozen dust. Though the theory was swiftly dismissed in scientific journals, it ignited global imagination. Illustrations spread, colossal structures hidden under greenish ice, speculative beams of light glowing from within. The astonishing part was that, instead of crushing this wave of imagination, the scientific community did not entirely deny it. Some astronomers openly admitted, "We don't understand Atlas, and it is precisely that, not knowing, which is valuable." This confession left the public more overwhelmed than ever. For the first time, the brightest minds stood shoulder to shoulder with everyone else on the ground of uncertainty. As the story spread, millions across the planet tilted their heads to the sky. They knew they could not see Atlas with the naked eye, and yet they looked, not to find a speck of light, but to connect with the feeling. We are witnessing a moment that has never happened before in history. From African villages to the skyscraper cities of America, from the elderly resting on porches to children clutching cheap plastic telescopes, all shared in one seemingly futile gesture, looking up. And in every gaze, shock was no longer just fear. It had transformed into a sacred kind of awe, like when humanity first stood before the boundless ocean or laid a hand on the stone walls of an ancient cave. Atlas was the new wall, only this one carved not of rock, but of ghostly green light from the farthest edges of the cosmos. News agencies began calling it the Atlas effect, an event that not only shook the foundations of science but also stirred a strange hope. Hope that beyond the frozen dark, answers were waiting. Hope that even if humanity remained small and powerless, the simple act of looking up together had made us vast in an entirely new way. In the second week since the discovery of 3I divided by Atlas, humanity entered a state the press began calling a knowledge crisis. No model could explain the nonlinear surge in brightness, no textbook had instructions for dealing with an object whose tail pointed the wrong way, and not a single old hypothesis could survive the torrent of data arriving each hour. With every new image from telescopes, fresh theories were scribbled down only to be crossed out almost instantly. All of science stood as if on a roaring wave, where every conclusion was swept away. Amid this chaos, the sense of awe spread beyond laboratories and into the streets. People gathered in city squares, where LED screens streamed Atlas's light data live. In Berlin, Alexanderplatz transformed into a public observatory, where thousands shouted with excitement one moment and trembled in silence the next, watching light curves spike upward like sheer cliffs. In Mexico City, street artists used laser beams to project Atlas's hyperbolic orbit across the walls of an old cathedral, turning science into a mystical ritual that left the crowd in tears. The shock had become a collective intoxication. Major newspapers no longer ran politics or economics on their front pages. Instead, they bore a single headline: Atlas shines brighter again. Relentless questions hammered at humanity. If this is a fragment from another star system, what elements does it carry that we have never known? If it truly holds secrets from an alien civilization, do we dare face that truth? On university campuses, students overflowed lecture halls, spilling into corridors to hear professors dissect each new spectral image. Classrooms became battlefields of eagerness. At MIT, an astrophysics professor burst into tears. "I've studied for more than 30 years, and I have never felt so small and so happy." The hall fell into stunned silence, then erupted in applause that lasted like a ritual, as though welcoming a guest from beyond the edges of the cosmos. Yet alongside the exhilaration crept a quiet unease. Some scientists issued warnings. If Atlas keeps brightening at this pace, it could be preparing for an unprecedented event, an explosion, fragmentation, or perhaps the release of energy we cannot control. The warning was not meant to sow panic, but to sound the alarm. Humanity was no longer just an observer. It might become part of the unfolding cosmic script. And yet, in this trembling uncertainty, a flame of hope burned brighter than ever before. People believed that if we could understand Atlas, we would not merely decode a celestial body, we might unlock a new chapter in the search for our very origins. International science organizations accelerated cooperation, sharing data in real time. For the first time in history, supercomputers across 3 continents ran a single model with one shared goal: to reconstruct the inner life of Atlas, even if only through digital echoes. Everywhere, children wrote letters to astronauts, expressing their dreams of seeing Atlas with their own eyes. An 8-year-old girl in Canada drew a picture of Atlas with a glowing green tail, adding a simple line: "If it came from very far away, it must feel lonely. Let's be its friend." The letter spread across the world, becoming a symbol of humanity's longing not just to decode, but to connect, to converse with the universe itself. On the 14th night, when Atlas flared with such intensity that the global astronomical alert systems reset, the entire world held its breath. And in that breathless stillness, something extraordinary happened. Instead of collapsing into fear, millions of people felt the same invisible certainty that within that blazing green light there was a message, unreadable for now, but undeniably real. On the 20th night since Atlas first appeared in the databases, the world entered a state difficult to name. No longer just short news bulletins, no longer dry technical reports, it became a global state of mind, where every nation, every community, every individual felt they were standing before a colossal doorway. A doorway opening from the darkness of the cosmos, shimmering with a shade of green light never seen before. In New Delhi, thousands sat in silent meditation, directing their minds toward the void where Atlas was racing. They believed their silence could become a bridge, a way to send a greeting to the interstellar visitor. In Los Angeles, artists staged light shows that simulated the hyperbolic orbit, turning the city sky into a cosmic stage. And in Geneva, at the headquarters of the United Nations, a special session was held for the first time, not to discuss war or crisis, but to ask, with what spirit shall we face Atlas? The initial shock had now deepened into a resonance in humanity's roots. It was no longer just astonishment at data or images, but an awakening to the truth that the universe was no longer distant. We were not merely observing an object, we were witnessing our own future reflected within it. Atlas became a mirror of finitude and infinite longing, finite in our helplessness, infinite in our faith that something greater still awaited. Scientists called it the opportunity of the century, but for the public, it felt more like a promise from the sky. People no longer debated whether Atlas was ice and dust or an artificial craft. Instead, they argued about something else. Was its arrival a reminder for humanity to stop dividing and start searching together for answers? Those conversations sprang up in Paris cafes, in Seoul classrooms, in live streams by teenagers in Lagos. Meanwhile, data from James Webb and global spectroscopic networks continued to deliver shocking signals. Atlas's brightness pulsed in a 131-second cycle, a number repeating with uncanny regularity, like a heartbeat, like an encoded message. No one dared declare it a signal, yet no one could dismiss the feeling that an alien pulse was echoing through the void. In that moment, awe was pushed to its limit. The entire world waited in silence, and in that silence, something extraordinary happened. Instead of fear, humanity felt a collective conviction that whatever Atlas truly was, it had already opened a new chapter. A chapter in which humankind was no longer confined to the role of small observers, but had stepped into the cosmic play as a central character. Children began dreaming of becoming astronauts more than ever. Governments increased budgets for space science. People who once turned away from knowledge now searched for online astronomy courses. Atlas had awakened a hunger for learning never seen before, a hunger that leapt across borders, across languages. And then, one late November evening, Atlas flared so brightly it outshone Orion for a few seconds, and the whole planet seemed to stop. In that instant, billions of people lifted their eyes at once, and in those gazes, shock, awe, curiosity, hope, and wonder all merged into one, forming a moment of global unity where humanity understood that Atlas was not merely a distant guest, but a test. Would we dare to rise beyond our smallness, to seek something greater? That moment closed the opening act of Atlas's story. Yet at the same time, it opened a new journey, a journey the entire world would now take together. Still trembling with awe, yet carried by a faith stronger than ever before, the universe had just sent us an invitation. As news of 3I divided by Atlas spread at the end of November 2024, the world began to confront a cold truth. This object did not belong to the solar system. At first, astronomers thought there might be calculation errors, but within days, data from optical, radio, and infrared telescopes all aligned. Atlas was traveling on a hyperbolic trajectory, an open curve that would never close. That path was like a permanent signature, confirming it as a traveler from beyond, passing by once, then leaving forever. The word hyperbolic had always been a dry term in astronomy textbooks, but once attached to Atlas, it became a nightmare of knowledge. Unlike Halley's Comet, which returns every 76 years, unlike thousands of asteroids bound by the sun's gravity, Atlas had absolute freedom. It would never return for us to study a second time. This plunged scientists into a state half euphoric, half despairing. Euphoric because they stood before a once-in-history opportunity, despairing because they knew it was their only chance. Observe now, or lose it forever. Quantum supercomputers in Geneva and Tokyo were mobilized to run orbital models. AI systems originally designed to predict dangerous asteroids delivered, for the first time, a unanimous result with zero margin of error. The probability of Atlas leaving the solar system after 2027 was an absolute 100%. That perfect number landed like a heavy blow on human consciousness. We are used to living in a world of probabilities and choices, yet with Atlas, there was only a cold inevitability. It would come, and then it would go, and all we could do was watch. An old professor in Kyoto whispered, "We are staring into a story written billions of years ago. Atlas does not belong to us. It only passes through, like a guest we can never persuade to stay." And there, humanity was confronted with a feeling beyond science, reverence for the cosmos. Not the vague awe of ancient myths, but a deep trembling as mathematical numbers hardened into irreversible truth. We can build cities, forge weapons, explore the moon, but before a hyperbolic curve, this entire civilization became fragile. We could not bend it, could not hold it, could not redirect Atlas. In that moment, humanity ceased to be conqueror and became a small observer, standing at the roadside watching a giant guest pass by. That reverence quickly spread beyond laboratories. News channels broadcast simulations of the trajectory, and the public unfamiliar with scientific jargon could still feel the chill of it. An open curve, detached, escaping the sun's embrace. It was like a blade slicing through space, exposing the truth that the solar system itself was only a brief stop along the endless sea route of the universe. Amid that shiver came another surge, the philosophy of smallness. A planet with 8 billion people, thousands of years of history, mighty empires, brilliant inventions, all shrank into a meaningless speck when set beside the absolute freedom of Atlas. It had crossed hundreds, perhaps thousands of star systems before arriving here. To it, Earth was just an accidental stopover. That thought broke some people, yet awakened others. That all our disputes, hatreds, and struggles under this sky were but tiny ripples against the vast breadth of the cosmos. And yet, within this helplessness, curiosity about origins ignited as a saving flame. If Atlas did not belong to us, then where did it come from? Scientists began tracing its birthplace through its light. Spectral data from the James Webb Space Telescope was analyzed down to the millisecond. Some hypothesized that Atlas was born in a distant nebula, the remnant of a supernova that exploded billions of years ago, where gas and dust merged into the first icy fragments. Others suggested it might have come from a young star system where planets were forming, flung outward by a violent collision. On philosophical and religious forums, unprecedented debates erupted. Some philosophers called Atlas a fossil memory of the universe. Some preachers saw it as a sign that humanity needed humility. In the Vatican, someone even asked, if Atlas carries elements unknown to Earth, are we facing another kind of scripture, written in the language of chemistry? Whether in agreement or rejection, all were swept into the same current, a painful curiosity about the origins of this distant guest. And so, while science tirelessly ran models, philosophy, art, and religion also surged forward, as if all humanity had fixed its eyes on the same streak of light. Atlas was no longer a mere object of study. It had become a mirror of our own existence. We were too small to alter it, but curious enough to want to understand it, and hungry enough to hope that through it, we might glimpse part of the answer to our own beginnings. If the hyperbolic orbit had already made the world tremble, then comparing Atlas with previous interstellar visitors only deepened the reverence. In less than a decade, humanity had welcomed 3 guests from beyond: Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, and now Atlas. But Atlas was different, and that difference made it no longer just a single astronomical event, but a new chapter in the history of the cosmos, where we were only powerless readers. Oumuamua, the first messenger, entered human memory as an unsolved riddle. It had no tail, no coma, just a long, thin body that streaked past too quickly, leaving behind countless theories, from an unusual rock to an alien spacecraft. But then it was gone, taking with it a collective sense of disappointment. Borisov, arriving 2 years later, looked more conventional, a a classic comet with gas and dust tails, yet its unusual chemical composition revealed the diversity of star systems. Still, compared to its two predecessors, Atlas told an entirely different story, a fusion of Oumuamua's strangeness and Borisov's brilliance, yet surpassing both. New images from Hubble and James Webb left scientists stunned. Atlas not only shone with unusual intensity, but carried an enormous coma, swelling to nearly half the Sun's diameter. More astonishing still, its tail pointed back toward the Sun, defying every known principle of physics. When this data was released, many scientists felt as though they were staring into a distorted cosmic mirror. Every theory they had trusted shattered in an instant. On a deeper level, those comparisons unlocked another philosophy. If Oumuamua was like a torn message, Borisov like a strange paragraph, then Atlas was a complete diary, written in the chemical language of a distant star. It was a living fossil, carrying within it the memory of a star system no one had ever seen, a moment in time never before experienced. Humanity suddenly felt as if it were standing before a glass case of cosmic fossils, granted the rare chance to read the inscription etched upon it. At international conferences, philosophical comparisons began to surface alongside scientific data. An Italian astronomer said, "Oumuamua was the question, Borisov was the hint, and Atlas is the confirmation that the universe is filled with other voices." The statement spread rapidly, not only in academic circles but across social media, where millions shared it as a, quote, awakening awe. The astonishment did not come from numbers alone, it came from the sense that Atlas was forcing us to change how we saw ourselves. If Oumuamua made us feel clumsy, and Borisov comforted us that we could still understand something, then Atlas confronted us with a harsher truth. The universe does not care about human comprehension. It runs on its own terms, and Atlas was a living testimony to that fact. Yet in that harshness, curiosity about origins only burned brighter. Scientists began proposing new hypotheses. Perhaps Atlas was not just a random shard, but the representative of a special class of objects, born in the farthest regions where stars are born and die. If true, then every interstellar visitor would be a unique sample, containing information about the hidden corners of the galaxy, unreachable by any telescope. On the philosophical front, people ventured even further. A scholar at Oxford asked, if interstellar objects keep appearing, could it be that the universe is trying to converse with us in the language of matter itself? And could it be that we are reading the very first letters of a book the universe has been writing for billions of years? These were not just abstract reflections, they touched the public's heart, making everyone feel they were part of a larger story. And so, placing Atlas beside Oumuamua and Borisov, humanity suddenly realized it was like a child learning the cosmic alphabet. Each interstellar guest was a single letter. We had only read 3, and already we were overwhelmed. If an entire story were written in thousands of such objects, then our current imagination had only brushed the edge of the page. Reverence, that was the common feeling that spread across the globe. It was no longer mere curiosity, but an absolute awe. Atlas had not only come from afar, it had arrived as a colossal mirror, reflecting both the limits of humanity and our longing to transcend them. If Oumuamua and Borisov had left humanity with a lingering mix of disappointment and curiosity, Atlas raised everything to an entirely new level. Not only because it was too bright, too unusual, but because humanity's most advanced technology itself began to acknowledge its own limits. From Geneva, the Synergia quantum supercomputer was programmed to process billions of calculations in seconds. From Tokyo, the AI system Kaguya analyzed each particle of light in the spectral data. In Pasadena, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory connected directly with DeepEye, a satellite launched in 2024 and equipped with photon sensors 10 times more sensitive than Hubble. Together, these machines formed a global brain, working in full synchronization for the first time in history just to observe a single object. And yet, the more data came in, the greater the reverence grew. The hyperbolic orbit was not only confirmed but revealed tiny disturbances that defied explanation, as if Atlas carried a strange gravitational signature, unlike any force known within the solar system. AI Kaguya issued a shocking report. There may be non-standard interactions, or a mass structure never before observed. Scientists reading it went silent. Some even had to step out of the conference room, feeling as though they had glimpsed a crack in the wall of physics they had trusted all their lives. And in that very helplessness, a strange emotion flared up, curiosity so intense it made them tremble. If Atlas truly contained an unknown mass structure, then it could stand as witness to physical laws yet unwritten. Some scientists whispered to each other, "This may be a turning point like Einstein's era, but instead of being written on paper, it comes from a block of ice and dust hurtling through the solar system." But Atlas awakened more than science. It stirred philosophy and religion alike. At Oxford, a special conference was held where philosophers debated, if the universe keeps sending us these interstellar messengers, could this be a form of unconscious communication, cosmos speaking to itself? A philosophy professor remarked, "Atlas doesn't answer us, but it forces us to ask questions. And sometimes, the question is more important than the answer." We get today things this brain too. Meanwhile, at the Vatican, clerics organized a special prayer. They did not ask Atlas to bring a message, but prayed that humanity would remain humble before its appearance. A cardinal declared, "If this is a bone of the universe, a fossil drifting from the dawn of creation, then perhaps God is showing us. His work is greater than anything humanity could ever imagine." In the Middle East, Muslim scholars quoted the Quran, "Look again at the sky, and then look again. Do you see any flaws?" That verse suddenly spread across social media, paired with images of Atlas as proof of creation's incomprehensible perfection. In India, monks spoke of Atlas as a cosmic pilgrim, a traveler through the reincarnations of stars, reminding humanity of the vast cycle of which we are only a tiny part. Never in modern history had a celestial body touched so many layers of human feeling and collective awareness. Reverence for the cosmos was no longer an abstract idea. It had become a shared experience. An MIT student, a farmer in Kenya, a Tibetan monk, a politician in Washington, all lifted their eyes to the same point of light, and, in that moment, all felt equally small. This also led to a rare political response. Superpowers set aside rivalry to cooperate in analyzing Atlas. A global data-sharing network was established, breaching firewalls, crossing borders. Observations from European satellites were sent directly to research centers in the US and China. Hacker groups that had once been adversaries now volunteered their computing power to run models. A diplomat at the United Nations commented, "Perhaps Atlas has accomplished what we could not, forcing humanity to cooperate, because we all stand before a mystery greater than our differences." And in that very moment, reverence for the cosmos rose into a strange form of veneration, not the worship of any single deity, but veneration for the infinite workings of the universe. Atlas never sent a message, but its presence was like a silent sermon, compelling humanity to bow its head. By late December 2024, as Atlas moved deeper into the solar system, the sense of reverence no longer belonged only to scientists or philosophers, it had spilled into everyday life. From Tokyo to New York, from Nairobi to Buenos Aires, winter evenings became moments of strange resonance. People sat before their phone screens, watching every update about Atlas, and at the same time lifted their eyes to the night sky even knowing they could not see it with the naked eye. They looked not to find it, but to feel themselves part of this cosmic moment. In classrooms, teachers turned Atlas into a living example. Students no longer studied Kepler's laws or Newton's formulas as dry abstractions. They watched those very laws being challenged in real time. A 12-year-old in Brazil asked his teacher, "If Newton can't explain Atlas, does that mean one day I might discover a new formula?" The innocent question left the class silent before erupting into applause. It was a reminder that in humanity's helplessness before the cosmos, the seeds of future hope are planted. In the media, Atlas's image was magnified, recolored, and set against grand soundtracks. But instead of diluting the message, this only deepened the sense of awe. People shared short videos that racked up millions of views, captioned, "This is how the universe reminds us of our smallness." And strangely, instead of despair, most viewers felt a quiet illumination, as though acknowledging their smallness opened a window of spiritual freedom, allowing them to turn toward deeper questions. In this climate, curiosity about Atlas's origin became a collective thirst. Scientists debated not only its chemical composition, but its homeland. A German team argued that Tlas came from a young stellar cluster in Cygnus. An American group claimed it could be a fragment from an icy planet destroyed around a red dwarf star. One bold theory suggested Atlas had wandered for billions of years through the spiral arms of the Milky Way, absorbing dust and ice from countless star systems, becoming a kind of traveling library of the galaxy. Though unproven, these theories carried enormous power to inspire. They set the public imagination ablaze, turning Atlas into a symbol of the longing for roots. In South Africa, young people painted murals of a radiant green Atlas with the words, "We too are travelers." In South Korea, a short film inspired by Atlas went viral, telling the story of a girl who believed its icy core carried the memory of humanity's birth. Art and science merged into a single current, bringing humanity closer to the oldest question, where do we come from? Reverence now transcended fear and became a spiritual ritual. In many places, people held all-night vigils, stargazing while discussing philosophies of life. Monks, philosophers, and scientists sat in the same circles, in dialogues never seen before. A monk said, "When we see Atlas, we see impermanence at the scale of the cosmos." A physicist replied, "And when we calculate Atlas, we see that even mathematics is not enough." Both fell silent, then laughed. That moment testified that Atlas posed questions not only to science, but to all of humanity. As 2024 came to a close, Atlas had become the symbol of an era, a symbol of humanity's finitude before infinity, of smallness but also the longing to reach beyond. Prestigious journals named Atlas the scientific event of the decade. But to many it was more. It was a mirror of existence, forcing every individual to ask, if the universe is so vast, then what is my role within it? And within that question, curiosity about origins was no longer only about Atlas, but about ourselves. Humanity understood that each time they looked at Atlas, they were not only watching a fragment of distant ice, but glimpsing their own fragile existence reflected. Cosmic reverence thus became a double act, trembling before the infinite, while burning with the desire to discover identity. Atlas would continue, passing the sun, slipping beyond sight. But its legacy was already etched. A moment when all humankind, despite differences of skin, faith, or language, looked in the same direction. And in that gaze, all felt overwhelmed, small, and yet more wondrously alive than ever before. In early January 2025, as Atlas passed beyond Jupiter's orbit and drew closer to Mars, the first high-resolution images began streaming back from the Deep Eye telescope array. The public waited eagerly for a clear portrait of the interstellar visitor, but what they received was a storm of bewilderment unlike anything before. In the very first frames, Atlas appeared unlike any comet ever known. Its coma, normally a faint blur of dust, shone vividly, with an unfamiliar blue, like an electronic halo encircling it. Its tail did not stretch away from the sun as radiation laws dictate, but bent back toward it, as if mocking the fundamental rules of space physics. A young scientist at Caltech gasped, "It looks like a living being turning its head to gaze back at the star, not fleeing from it." Doubt spread instantly. Research teams clashed fiercely. Was this merely an optical effect from the camera? Was it some form of plasma, never before observed? Or the boldest hypothesis was Atlas not entirely a natural object? Every theory was met with a barrage of counterarguments. Online conferences turned into battlegrounds. Science, once the lighthouse of certainty, had become a foggy sea where ships of theory collided endlessly. But it was not just scientists. Thanks to social media, the public followed this confusion almost in real time. Images of Atlas went viral, paired with captions, "Interstellar monster? This comet's tail has gone mad. Could this be a sign of extraterrestrial intelligence?" Each suggestion, whether absurd or plausible, spread widely, making doubt not only the scientists' burden, but the world's collective mood. Within that chaos, tiny details only deepened the tension. Deep Eye's AI reported that Atlas's brightness not only rose unpredictably, but pulsed in a steady 131-second rhythm, a beat as regular as a heartbeat. Scientists rushed to insist it was likely a natural resonance effect, but the public thought otherwise. To many, it felt like a sign of life, a cosmic breath echoing across space, and that idea alone was enough to send shivers through millions. Artists seized the inspiration immediately. Online, a painting spread depicting Atlas as a colossal eye-opening in the void, its tail transformed into glowing blood vessels reaching back toward the sunday. The image entranced and unsettled the public alike. One art critic remarked, "Atlas has moved beyond science. It has become a living symbol, a symbol of disorder, where reason and intuition both fail." In homes, cafes, and forums alike, conversations burned. Was Atlas hiding something within? Was it only an enormous shard of ice and dust, or some natural architecture so alien in form that we could not comprehend it? No answers emerged, but the very absence of answers heightened the unease, making people more restless, more shaken than ever. For the frightening truth lay not in the existence of an explanation, but in the fact that no one could yet offer one. When an object becomes a mirror of knowledge's limits, every glance at it carries a chill of awe. Atlas, just a shard of ice and dust from a far-off place, had become an entity powerful enough to stir emotion, defy science, and seed in humanity a gnawing doubt not easily undone. In the first weeks of February 2025, as Atlas drew closer to Mars, the flood of data grew larger, but instead of clarity, it only pulled humanity deeper into a storm of doubt. Every time one research team published results, within hours, another group released numbers that completely contradicted them. Spectroscopy recorded dense concentrations of carbon dioxide in Atlas's coma, something never seen in ordinary comets. Meanwhile, a European group claimed to have detected traces of methane and complex organic compounds far beyond expectations. DeepEye's AI even suggested the possible presence of prebiotic molecules in Atlas's icy shell, a claim so bold that veteran scientists frowned in unease. And yet, no one dared dismiss it outright, because the data itself was simply too unusual. Behind closed doors, meetings grew taut as violin strings. A NASA scientist suddenly stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "We cannot keep calling this a comet. None of our definitions fit anymore." That outburst was quickly quoted in the press, leaving the public shuddering. If even the explainers of the cosmos were losing their way, then for ordinary people, Atlas became a lurking mystery in the dark. On online forums, conspiracy theories erupted. Some swore Atlas was a disguised reconnaissance craft. Others proclaimed it a harbinger of apocalypse, citing ancient prophecies. Certain YouTube channels produced videos depicting Atlas as a radiant polyhedron hiding a massive machine inside. These images spread with viral speed, carrying the tension from research labs into living rooms and onto the phones of millions. Strangely, even the healthy data from science fueled unease. James Webb recorded Atlas's light oscillating in regular pulses, producing graphs that looked uncannily like digital signals. Some scientists explained this as plasma radiation oscillations, but the public whispered, "It looks like it's transmitting something." The thought sent shivers everywhere. People lost sleep, glued to live streams of the data feed as if waiting for a hidden message to reveal itself. In the arts, confusion turned into a dark muse. An electronic music group in Berlin released an album titled Pulse of Atlas, built around a bass line repeating every 131 seconds the exact cycle of its light variations. The launch concert drew thousands, all closing their eyes to feel that rhythm, entranced yet unsettled. In painting, new works depicted Atlas as a vast organism adrift in space, eyes glowing, its tail bending toward the sun like tendrils reaching out to probe. Philosophers, meanwhile, saw in it an existential crisis. If once we believed the universe could be gradually decoded through consistent laws, Atlas exposed another face. Perhaps some things exist solely to shake certainty. A professor in Paris wrote, "Atlas is not simply an object, it is a mirror, reflecting humanity's obsession with clarity, and it forces us to see. Ambiguity itself may be the true essence of the cosmos." Meanwhile, the public began experiencing something uncanny, the feeling of being observed in return. Many confessed that when they looked at magnified images of Atlas, they felt as though an enormous eye were watching them. Dreams were shared on Reddit, visions of Atlas approaching Earth, staring down like a waking creature. Though only a form of collective psychology, it perfectly reflected the state of things. Confusion and suspicion had seeped into the depths of the unconscious. Atlas, in human eyes, was no longer an astronomical body. It was slowly becoming a metaphysical presence, something both real and dreamlike, both a scientific problem and a collective nightmare. And it was precisely this blurring of boundaries that made the world so tense. No one knew whether they were observing a harmless block of ice and dust, or facing a mystery capable of overturning every concept humanity thought it understood. By mid-February 2025, as Atlas pressed closer toward Mars, confusion had hardened into a crisis of faith. It was no longer just conflicting data, but a stark division within the scientific community itself. Some institutes insisted that Atlas obeyed classical physics, describing it as nothing more than a strange plasma phenomenon. Others argued it revealed a mechanism never before seen, something beyond existing models. The debate spread so far that international conferences became battlegrounds. In one online session with over 5,000 researchers, the Zoom grid lit up red, with microphones switching on all at once, one voice declaring, "It's only anomalous ice evaporation," another retorting, "If it's only ice, then why does its tail defy the very law of radiation?" Each word fell like a hammer, striking at science's claim to certainty. Meanwhile, the public no longer waited for a definitive answer. Instead, they fell into a collective shudder. Every newly released image was dissected on social media like evidence in a trial. People zoomed in on pixels, redrew spectral lines, and attached theories of every kind. Some claimed to see structural shapes inside the coma. Others swore the 131-second cycle resembled binary code. Each evening became a kind of public tribunal, with Atlas as the silent yet terrifying witness. The media only heightened the tension. Headlines screamed, "Atlas, an object that looks back. Science divided. Humanity trembles." Some outlets published illustrations of Atlas as a colossal eye casting its shadow across Earth. Though only graphics, they haunted the public imagination, planting the image that Atlas was not merely observed but was observing in return. In the arts, the effect became even stronger. An independent documentary from South Korea streamed online, blending real data with staged visuals, Atlas rotating, revealing a glowing core. The film spread rapidly, not because people believed its accuracy, but because it tapped directly into the collective unease already simmering in millions of minds. The strain bled into daily life. Many admitted to recurring nightmares in which Atlas drew near, casting a green shadow across the entire Earth. Psychologists began calling it the Atlas syndrome, a collective obsession triggered by an event that lay beyond human comprehension. History had seen such moments before, from ancient eclipses to the Tunguska explosion. But Atlas surpassed them all, not because it struck in an instant, but because it stretched across months, reminding humanity day after day that something out there lay beyond our grasp. In philosophical discussions, darker thoughts began to surface. Perhaps the universe did not want us to understand. A professor in Berlin declared, "The existence of Atlas is not to reveal, but to remain silent, and it is that silence which is the message." The remark was quoted widely, sowing in the public a chilling suspicion that humanity might be staring at a forbidden secret. The shudder no longer came only from strange data, but from the thought that a cosmic secret might be hovering in plain sight, yet forever out of reach. Atlas, in its silence, seemed to hold humanity deliberately in doubt, refusing to allow any explanation to stand. And in that suspension, collective emotion rose to a peak, tense, overwhelmed, unsettled to the very core. By March 2025, as Atlas entered its most favorable phase of observation from Earth's orbital telescopes, the global atmosphere had reached its breaking point. No one saw it as merely a scientific event anymore. Atlas had become a haunting presence, infiltrating dreams, conversations, and newspaper headlines alike. High-resolution images revealed details even stranger. On Atlas's jagged surface, glowing streaks appeared like fissures of light, flaring and fading in cycles. Scientists offered a provisional explanation, perhaps jets of sublimating ice venting gas into space. But the fact that the flashes matched the 131-second rhythm left the public unconvinced. To them, those glowing cracks looked like windows opening and closing, as if something inside were regulating its breath. The shudder came not only from the images, but from science's helplessness itself. Each hypothesis crumbled the moment new data arrived. Humanity seemed to be playing a game it could never win. The closer we came, the more direction we lost. And as the confusion stretched on, it hardened into a deeper suspicion that perhaps the frameworks humanity had built for centuries were only shards of a vast mosaic that would never be complete. Many began to feel as though they were facing a betrayal by the universe. We had trusted that with telescopes, mathematics, and AI, we would conquer the sky. Yet Atlas, in its silence, seemed to smile in mockery. A scientist in Geneva wrote in his private journal, "I am no longer sure we are observing a comet. I'm beginning to think it is observing us." When the diary entry leaked, millions read it and shivered, for it captured exactly what so many had secretly felt. Everywhere, philosophers and thinkers pressed deeper. At a Harvard discussion, one scholar remarked, "Atlas is the negation of the hunger for certainty. It exists to remind us that doubt is not failure, but the essence of being human." The quote spread quickly, but instead of soothing, it sharpened the tension. If doubt was our essence, then perhaps humanity would forever remain lost, never reaching truth. In daily life, existential obsession spreads widely. In many countries, communities gathered around bonfires to share strange dreams about Atlas. A farmer in Argentina said he dreamed Atlas fell into the pampas, becoming a giant of ice. An engineer in South Korea dreamed of standing on Atlas's surface, staring at thousands of eyes carved into the ice. The dreams were not real, but they mirrored the collective obsession. Atlas had entered humanity's shared unconscious. Artists, instead of merely depicting, began creating works as rituals. An exhibition in London displayed screens pulsing with blue light every 131 seconds, forcing viewers to sit in darkness, feeling the invisible heartbeat. Many left in tears, saying they felt unbearably small. A critic wrote, "Atlas has transformed from a comet into a silent prophet, and what it prophesies is our own helplessness." Global tension reached its peak when a group of young scientists publicly proposed that Atlas might contain an artificial structure within. Though swiftly condemned by the academic establishment, the public seized on the idea as if it were a lifeline. In endless confusion, it felt easier to believe some intelligence was behind it than to accept that the universe might simply be chaos without answers. And then, at the height of human anxiety, Atlas remained silent. No signals, no messages, only the recurring, shuddering green light. Yet it was that silence that struck hardest, a silence with the weight of a roar, making the whole planet tremble. In that way, Atlas closed its first phase of observation, leaving humanity not with answers, but with a profound psychological aftershock. Confusion transmuted into fundamental doubt, tension into existential dread. Humanity realized it no longer stood as observer, but had become the subject of the universe's gaze, a gaze invisible, yet powerful enough to shatter the trust we had built over centuries. In April 2025, as Atlas reached the most favorable distance for observation, the first ultra-high-resolution spectrographic data from James Webb and DeepEye were released. And in that very moment, the world slipped into a state of scientific unease, unlike anything it had ever known. Researchers had expected to see familiar compounds, water, carbon monoxide, frozen dust, like those found in ordinary comets. Instead, the analysis charts revealed strange spectral lines, CO2, in shockingly high concentrations, while water, the very substance that normally dominates comets, appeared only in trace amounts. This finding shook the foundations of every definition. A scientist from the European Space Agency declared at a press conference, "If this is a comet, it is the strangest comet that has ever existed. And if it isn't, then we need a new word to name it." But the unease did not stop there. DeepEye detected complex organic compounds, long carbon chains, with even hints of amino acid-like molecules. If the results were accurate, Atlas was not just a peculiar object, but a chemical vault of life itself. The revelation ignited hope. Could Atlas carry within it the answer to humanity's oldest question? Where does life begin? Yet with hope came waves of disquiet. The data was deeply contradictory. A team at MIT announced the discovery of formaldehyde, a compound often linked to primordial organic reactions, but a group in Japan countered that the results were nothing more than analytical noise, and that they themselves had found only methanol and acetylene. Conflicting reports piled atop one another, leaving the public even more unsettled. If even science could not agree, who could the world trust? Media headlines pushed the tension further. Atlas may carry the seeds of life, alongside dire warnings such as "beware of biological threats from space." Optimistic articles painted visions of hope. If Atlas carried prebiotic molecules, perhaps life on Earth itself was born from a similar cosmic gift. But darker voices sowed fear. If Atlas carried molecular forms unknown to Earth, could they pose a risk of contamination the moment humanity tried to touch them? In emergency sessions, the United Nations Committee on Biosafety began debating whether humanity should even attempt a sample return mission from Atlas, or whether doing so might unleash uncontrollable risks. Some biologists issued stark warnings. We do not know what we would bring back. An unfamiliar amino acid could be harmless, but it could also act as a catalyst that disrupts Earth's microscopic ecosystems. These warnings layered new unease atop the old, transforming Atlas from a symbol of cosmic hope into a potential biological threat. The public, too, fractured in response. One part of the world embraced Atlas with excitement, believing it was proof we were not alone. Hashtags like #AtlasLife and #Seeds of Stars flooded Twitter. People shared artwork depicting Atlas as a giant hand scattering seeds down onto Earth, planting the beginnings of life. Yet another part of the world was seized by fear. Forums bristled with worries of a cosmic virus, while doomsday blogs warned of humanity, awakening a nightmare frozen in ice. Amid all this, unease became the central heartbeat of the age. Atlas, through its abnormal chemistry, was no longer just shaking science, it was striking at humanity's deepest fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of what cannot be controlled. And that was why each new data point fell like an emotional bomb, sparking hope and panic in equal measure. As May 2025 began, the chemical portrait of Atlas did not grow clearer. It dissolved into a maze of contradictions. Every laboratory, every research team released different results, and instead of complementing one another, they cancelled each other out, filling the air with suffocating uncertainty. At the Goddard Laboratory, scientists announced they had detected signs of glycine, one of the most basic amino acids, often called the first building block of life. The news exploded across global media. Major outlets splashed headlines, "Atlas may carry life's formula." Shares of biotech companies skyrocketed in a single day. But less than 48 hours later, a Swiss team struck back. The glycine signal was nothing more than noise caused by cosmic background radiation. The hopeful headlines quickly gave way to disappointment. Error dashes life discovery, leaving the public swinging wildly between ecstasy and disillusionment. Meanwhile, a Japanese group reported something different. Traces of cyanide in Atlas's coma. Cyanide, a notorious poison, but paradoxically, also long suspected of catalyzing the formation of nucleotides, the very backbone of DNA. The public read the headlines and shuddered. Atlas carries both the seeds of life and the poison of death. Confusion surged, for a single object seemed to embody two opposing extremes, the beginning and the end. At scientific conferences, the atmosphere resembled a courtroom. Research teams presented their data, but instead of applause, they were met with harsh cross-examination. An elder professor from ESA snapped, "We can no longer pretend this is a scientific discussion. This has become a crisis of trust. If Atlas continues to deliver contradictory results, then can science itself still serve as our compass?" The room fell into heavy silence, punctuated only by long, weary sighs. And yet, amid the unease, hope refused to die. A group of young scientists in India swiftly published a paper arguing that Atlas's unusual chemical diversity was the strongest evidence yet for panspermia, the theory that life can be seeded across the universe by interstellar objects. If Atlas carries a wide array of organic compounds, perhaps Earth itself once received a similar gift from distant wanderers, they wrote. Their report spread like wildfire, igniting public imagination with the belief that we are not alone. But the opposing voice came just as swiftly. At the United Nations, the Biosafety Committee convened an emergency meeting. Some experts warned, if Atlas carries unknown molecules, we cannot dismiss the risk that they may be seeds of disaster. A single foreign protein entering Earth's biosphere could trigger a catastrophe we cannot predict. Images of tense scientists seated in dim conference rooms, faces grim, were broadcast on international television, seeding yet another wave of fear. Atlas is not a gift, but a Pandora's box from the stars. The divide seeped quickly into society. On social media, two movements collided. One, jubilant, spread the hashtag #AtlasHope, believing we stood at the threshold of proof of extraterrestrial life. The other, fearful, pushed #AtlasThreat, urging, "Don't touch Atlas. Let it pass." Heated arguments raged endlessly, mirroring the violent swings of collective psychology, torn between the hunger to explore and the terror of the unknown. In art and popular culture, the tension only grew louder. Within weeks, a new science fiction novel hit shelves, depicting humanity's attempt to sample Atlas, only to unleash a cold virus that destroys the planet. The book became a global bestseller, feeding public unease. In contrast, a hopeful documentary painted Atlas as the second cradle of life, inspiring millions of teenagers to dream of becoming scientists. With all its contradictory data, Atlas had become a mirror reflecting the state of humanity. Science was no longer certain, trust was under siege, hope and dread twisted into a single knot. With every discovery, humanity's heart leapt in excitement, only to sink back into doubt. And it was precisely this brutal rhythm of highs and lows that turned Atlas into the epicenter of a crisis of faith, unlike anything in the history of science. As June 2025 approached, the debates surrounding Atlas were no longer confined to laboratories. They erupted into a full-scale crisis, scientific, political, and ethical. The core question was stark: should humanity launch a mission to collect samples from Atlas, or not? The world's major space agencies took sides. NASA proposed Mission Aegis, an autonomous probe designed to scoop just a few grams of dust from Atlas's coma. ESA expressed support, but China and Russia pushed back vehemently, warning that any material brought back could endanger Earth's biosphere. A Chinese delegate declared at the United Nations, "You call it discovery. We call it gambling with the future of humanity." He's fording stings. Meanwhile, young scientists worldwide rallied together, signing a petition that gathered over 1 million signatures demanding, "Do not miss this once-in-history opportunity." They argued that Atlas would never return. To pass it by would be to lose forever the chance to prove the cosmic origins of life. Peaceful demonstrations broke out in cities across the globe, young people hoisting placards that read, "Let us know the truth." Their burning hope spread like wildfire. At the same time, fierce opposition surged. Environmental and medical organizations issued grim warnings. You have no idea what you might bring back. A single unfamiliar compound could disrupt DNA chains and cause irreversible consequences. A group of biologists within the WHO insisted that if Atlas truly harbored unknown molecules, there was no mechanism on Earth to guarantee absolute safety. On the streets, protesters shouted, "Do not open Pandora's box on Earth." The divide filled global media with dueling images. On one side, young faces full of hope, convinced of a monumental discovery. On the other, anxious eyes haunted by the belief that one mistake could annihilate the planet. The public was left swaying violently between longing and fear. At international conferences, the atmosphere grew suffocating. In Geneva, a debate raged for 12 straight hours as an American scientist and a Russian biologist squared off before hundreds of delegates. The American pounded the table. "We are staring at evidence of extraterrestrial life." The Russian shot back, "Or the evidence of our own extinction." The hall fell deathly silent before erupting in whispers of dread. Meanwhile, social media remained a battlefield of opposing hashtags, #AtlasHope and #AtlasThreat. A video of a 15-year-old girl weeping as she said, "I just want to know if we are alone in the universe," went viral with tens of millions of views. Almost simultaneously, another clip circulated showing activists unveiling a model of a virus monster with icy blue wings, emblazoned with the words, "Do not wake it." Two emotional currents collided, stirring humanity into a psychological tsunami. Scientific unease had now burst its academic boundaries. It had become an existential trial for the species. Humanity was forced to confront a suffocating question. Was the hunger for discovery worth the risk of destruction? Hope and dread no longer existed separately. They had merged into a single, unbearable weight that pressed down on every decision. In the realm of art, the divide was amplified further. A Netflix documentary titled Atlas, The Promise and the Threat premiered, weaving together footage of scientific debates with surreal imagery of an Earth simultaneously blooming and freezing. The film ended with a question: which door will we choose? Audiences left theaters in heavy silence. On the philosophical front, scholars gave the turmoil a name: the Atlas Shock. It was the moment humanity realized that knowledge does not only bring light, it also casts shadows. A philosopher in Kyoto wrote, "We often believe ignorance is what unsettles us, but sometimes it is knowledge itself that becomes the seed of fear." And indeed, Atlas was no longer just a distant celestial body. It had become humanity's deepest mirror, where every chemical data point was both a promise and a threat. Scientific unease, once confined to a handful of labs, had now become the very heartbeat of the planet. By July 2025, as Atlas crossed perihelion near Mars, the global debate reached its breaking point. Fresh chemical data from DeepEye and James Webb poured fuel onto the fire of unease. A joint report from 3 leading research centers confirmed the existence of an organic compound unlike anything ever catalogued. Its molecular structure so intricate that supercomputers needed days just to simulate it. The result was staggering. If stable, this compound could serve as the foundation of a biological system entirely alien to Earth. Immediately, two opposing emotional tides surged. One side erupted in hope. This is the strongest evidence yet that we are not alone. Optimistic newspapers described Atlas as a cosmic mailbox, carrying the message that life is not Earth's exclusive privilege. Yet, on the opposite side, dread peaked. If life elsewhere is built so differently, could it ever be compatible with us? Or would it be a poison? Editorials warned, when humanity opens this mailbox, it may receive either a gift or a death sentence. What she was pry of the small, Go-Ning. At international conferences, the divide grew irreparable. A group of young scientists cried out through tears, "We cannot turn back. If we ignore Atlas, we will remain forever in the dark." Moments later, a veteran biologist countered coldly, "The price of light may be destruction. Do you dare gamble all of humanity for curiosity's sake?" The chamber froze, then erupted with both applause and jeers, a raw fracture splitting the scientific community itself. The public, watching it all unfold, experienced an emotional whiplash like never before. Live streams from the conferences racked up hundreds of millions of views, with comments divided between "Be brave, open the door," and "Do not let knowledge become the fire that consumes us." Hope and dread twisted around one another, creating a suffocating psychological climate that enveloped the planet. In popular culture, this duality became an artistic obsession. A play staged in New York portrayed Atlas as a guest knocking at humanity's door, holding in his hands a glittering box. The protagonist faced a choice: open it and perhaps find light, or refuse and live forever in doubt. Audiences left the theater in heavy silence, realizing the story was no fiction, it was their present reality. In philosophy, many call this moment a new existential threshold. A Cambridge scholar wrote, "Atlas has transformed science into a mirror of the soul. It shows us that the essence of knowledge is not certainty, but the abyss of questions it unveils." The essay spread widely, sending shivers through readers. If that were true, then unease was not a passing state, but humanity's fate in the cosmos. On the political stage, decisions turned suffocating. The UN Council voted on whether to approve a sample return mission. The result was deadlocked, half in favor, half against. The verdict was postponed, leaving the world suspended in limbo, caught between hope and dread, unsure whether the future would open to light or shadow. In daily life, the psychological ripple spreads. Many no longer saw Atlas through the lens of science, but through their own personal reflections. One parent wrote in a journal, "When I look at Atlas, I see the chance for my child to grow up in a world that knows it is not alone." Another wrote, "When I look at it, I see a threat to everything I love." Atlas, in its chemical silence, had planted different voices in every heart, turning the planet into a chaotic chorus. And in that chorus, scientific unease reached its ultimate crescendo. It was no longer the fear of a few researchers, but a collective psychic quake. Atlas, an inanimate block of ice and dust, had forced humanity to confront its deepest paradox. We crave knowledge, yet knowledge itself can be the source of our most profound fear. As Atlas drifted farther, silent and cold, it left behind not answers but a fracture, a crack running through science, through trust, through the human heart. And from that crack echoed a question never before asked. Could it be that this very unease was Atlas's true message? In September 2025, the atmosphere on Earth felt like humanity was entering a kind of cosmic World Cup. But instead of watching soccer matches, the entire species fixed its gaze on one single moment, the instant when Atlas would sweep past Mars. Everyone understood this was more than a scientific milestone, it was the first time humanity could witness, up close, an interstellar visitor through the very electronic eyes it had launched into the heavens. Across observatories and space centers, human heartbeats synced with the countdown clock. In Houston, NASA engineers set up massive screens tracking Atlas's trajectory, aligned with the path of the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Every tiny dot on the chart made them hold their breath, for even the slightest error would cause the cameras to miss, and the entire planet would lose its one chance. In Beijing, the Tianwen-2 control team stayed on watch for 48 sleepless hours, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling as they checked each parameter. In Europe, the ExoMars orbiter was pre-programmed to swing its camera at the exact second Atlas brushed past the Martian atmosphere. These three mechanical eyes now bore the collective hopes of all humankind. The suspense was not confined to control rooms. Schools turned the event into special lessons. Students sat in perfect silence before projection screens, following each live update as though awaiting the results of a global exam. Families in New York, Mumbai, and Nairobi kept their televisions on all night. The blue glow lighting faces stretched in tension, eyes wide with expectation. Elderly people sat motionless in their armchairs. Children clutched their teddy bears, all sharing the same sensation, hearts pounding toward a moment not yet arrived. On social media, the hashtag number Atlas near Mars climbed to the top worldwide, accompanied by captions written with trembling emotion. "If we miss this moment, there will never be another." Some joked it was the World Cup of the cosmos, but in truth, the weight in everyone's chest was heavier than any soccer final. A championship could always return 4 years later, but Atlas would not. It would pass by only once, and if humanity failed, regret would linger for centuries. The fear of missing out grew into a collective obsession. Experts issued constant reminders. A single failure, a malfunctioning camera, a lost signal, a slight miscalculation would erase months, even decades of preparation. Atlas would slip past, leaving behind an emptiness no one could fill. Each passing hour was like a needle pricking at anticipation, stirring excitement, yet making every heart quiver. In the final days of September, newspapers described the event as an Edisonian moment, a chance for humanity to light a new bulb of knowledge or else remain in darkness. Commentators called it a performance of destiny, with the whole planet seated together in an invisible stadium, waiting for the universe to draw back its curtain. All eyes turned toward Mars, but in truth, they were turned inward, into the depths of human longing. In the rush of anticipation, people realized that what they feared losing was not merely the image of a comet, but their one opportunity to understand their place in the cosmos. If they missed this chance, no one could say when, or if, another would come. And it was this feeling of a moment that would happen only once, never again, that transformed anticipation into breathless tension, making September 2025 the month when humanity collectively held its breath before a spectacle unlike anything in history. On the night of the 2nd of October 2025, the entire planet seemed to enter a silent ceremony. No music, no fireworks, no prior arrangement. Yet billions of people all turned their heads toward the same direction. Toward Mars, where Atlas was about to pass at its closest approach. The air on Earth grew so heavy it felt as if everyone was sharing the same heartbeat. In Houston, the countdown clock glowed on a giant screen, each red number slicing into the silence like a knife. NASA engineers hardly dared to breathe. Everyone knew that a single error would cause the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's camera to miss, and Atlas, the interstellar visitor, making its only appearance in history, would slip by without leaving a single image behind. The thought of it charged the room with static, every gaze fixed on the thin white line of light moving across the chart. In Beijing, the Tianwen-2 control team had lined up cots inside their command room, but no one even closed their eyes. The youngest engineer, only 27, confessed to the press, "I've never been afraid of pressing a button before, but this time, if we fail, my entire generation will carry that regret for the rest of our lives." His words spread online, sending a shiver through millions, for he had voiced the fear that already weighed on every heart. In Europe, the ExoMars orbiter was placed in Atlas priority mode, meaning every other system was shut down, so all power could feed into its camera. ESA engineers called it a do-or-die move. One official admitted at a press conference, "There is no turning back. If Atlas passes and we fail to capture it, humanity may have to wait thousands of years for another chance, and perhaps it will never come." Meanwhile, the public endured a sleepless night of their own. In Berlin, thousands gathered with folding chairs and blankets in the square, huddled in the cold before a massive LED screen where Atlas's path traced a faint streak of light. In New York, Times Square overflowed with silent crowds, all eyes fixed on NASA's live feed. In Cairo, families carried food to the banks of the Nile, chatting quietly as the scrolling text ticked down. 17 hours, 12 minutes remaining. On social media, emotions surged like a flood. The hashtag number Atlas near Mars has passed hundreds of millions of shares. A student in Brazil wrote, "I've never been this nervous, not for myself, but for all of humanity." Another posted a photo of his wall clock with the caption, "Every second feels 1,000 times heavier." The fear of missing out became a global obsession. If Atlas slipped past unrecorded, humanity would live forever with a wound in its knowledge. Major television networks broadcast live coverage through the night. Commentators compared the moment to Apollo 11's moon landing, but quickly emphasized that Atlas was even more unique. Apollo could be repeated with new missions, but Atlas would never return. It was a once-only guest, and if missed, there would be no second chance. In countless homes, parents woke their children at midnight so they could witness it together. Sleepy-eyed, wrapped in blankets, little hands held tight to bigger ones. A girl in Tokyo whispered, "If Atlas looks back at us, I hope it sees me smiling." Her innocent words spread across social networks, becoming the purest symbol of hope in the suffocating air of anticipation. As the countdown clock shifted from hours to minutes, suspense grew into global breathlessness. Pilots, doctors, students, factory workers, no matter their role in society, shared the same single thought. Tomorrow, will we see Atlas clearly, or only an empty silence? And it was this very thought that turned the night of October 2 into the longest night in the memory of an entire generation. The 3rd of October 2025. Earth sank into an uncanny silence. Streets once noisy now carried only a few cars. Cafes replaced music with giant screens, and classrooms paused their lessons. The world seemed to freeze, united in anticipation of a single moment: Atlas drawing near to Mars. At NASA's Mission Control, the countdown clock glared on the screen, each second cutting into the tense air like a blade. Engineers exchanged quiet glances, none daring to smile, none daring to breathe too heavily. One whispered, "It feels like I'm watching humanity's heartbeat slow down." The words fell into silence, yet they deepened the unbearable weight of the moment. In Beijing, the Tianwen-2 team sat with headsets pressed tight, eyes locked on the display. The commander gripped the armrest of his chair, his palms slick with sweat. Every command had already been programmed. There was nothing left to do but wait. The moment was like standing at the edge of a cliff. Either a new sky would open, or humanity would plunge into an abyss of regret. In Europe, the ExoMars orbiter adjusted to the exact angle, its camera trained on Mars's horizon. Engineers knew the cruel reality of the 8-minute light delay, that a few minutes of waiting would feel like eternity. They could only pray that when the signal reached Earth, it would carry Atlas's light, not the void of an empty black screen. Many in the control room stood, unable to sit, hands trembling as they clutched their chairs. Meanwhile, across the world, the public held its breath. In Times Square, tens of thousands stood beneath the glow of LED billboards, but no one cheered. All eyes were lifted, rigid with tension. In Berlin, crowds huddled in blankets in the square, shivering not just from the autumn wind but from anticipation. In Tokyo, trains paused for several minutes as passengers bowed their heads toward their phones, glued to the live stream. In Lagos, families dragged plastic chairs outside, sitting close together under the moonlight, waiting in silence. The entire planet seemed to stop, holding still for one image that would define a generation. When the countdown fell to 30 seconds, mission control centers choked on the weight of it. Blurred dots flickered on the radar, then sharpened into a steady streak of light. At ESA, an engineer burst into tears even before the data finished downloading. Just seeing the signal meant the cameras hadn't missed, that Atlas had been captured. Those tears of tension made the moment even more overwhelming. Then, the first images arrived on Earth, and the world erupted in an explosion of emotion. On the screen, Atlas appeared a colossal, blue-grey mass, etched with glowing fissures, flickering open and shut like luminous cracks. No longer a faint smudge in telescopes, but a vivid, living presence, strange and mesmerizing. Crowds screamed, embraced, and many collapsed in tears. In New York, the roar resembled a World Cup final. In Nairobi, people fell to their knees, eyes raised to the heavens. In Buenos Aires, trumpets blared, only to be drowned out by a stunned, reverent silence. The jubilation lasted only a heartbeat, before giving way to a heavier question. What exactly had we just seen? The glowing fissures, the green-blue streaks pulsing in cycles, unsettled millions. Hope had ignited, but so too had fear. If Atlas was truly this different, what hid beneath that frozen shell? Was it a door to life, or a chasm beyond control. And so, after the burst of wonder, the world sank into a new suspense, deeper, weightier than before. Humanity now understood that from this moment on, we were no longer merely observing Atlas. We had opened a door that no one could say for certain whether we would ever be able to close again. The first close-up images of Atlas did more than set the world cheering. They also ignited a profound silence afterward. Humanity had seen it clear, detailed, alive, and yet that clarity opened the door to a new suspense, far more intense than the anticipation that had come before. The photographs revealed a rugged surface, interwoven with shimmering blue-violet ice and glowing fissures, as if carved by the invisible hand of some cosmic artisan. Spectral data unveiled the presence of complex organic compounds. Each discovery sparked joy and awe, but also sent shivers through humanity. Was Atlas truly carrying the answer to life's origins? Or was it guarding a secret that was never meant to be unearthed? In Houston, NASA engineers embraced, many breaking down in tears. They had succeeded, yet moments after the applause, the mood quickly dimmed. One specialist whispered, "We've opened a door. The question is, do we have the courage to step through it?" In Beijing, the Tianwen-2 team stood silently around their screens, no words spoken. A young engineer admitted, "I am happy, but I am also afraid. I don't know if we've just witnessed a beginning or an ending." On the streets, emotions split in two. Some celebrated, raising glasses to toast the historic triumph. Others stood quietly, gazing at the sky with distant eyes. Online, two hashtags trended side by side. Number "We saw Atlas," the relief and pride of not missing it, and number "What did we see?" the dread that what humanity had just witnessed lay beyond comprehension. Two phrases, two heartbeats of billions of people, joy and unease, blazing light and trembling shadow. The press declared it the greatest and most terrifying moment in modern scientific history. Major newspapers splashed Atlas's close-ups on their front pages, but beneath the images ran cautious commentary. Perhaps we have seen too much. Some experts warned that the clearer our view became, the stronger the temptation to push further, and that temptation itself could drive humanity toward perilous decisions. In popular culture, responses came instantly. A filmmaker released a short clip titled "The Door That Cannot Be Closed." The video showed Atlas slowly rotating in space, intercut with the astonished, anxious eyes of children around the world. It went viral, resonating with the contradictory mood that now gripped humanity: pride laced with apprehension. Philosophers suggested that the Atlas encounter had transformed suspense into a philosophical condition. A professor in Paris wrote, "We tremble not merely because we awaited the images, but because we realize we have crossed into a new era, one in which all knowledge must be questioned." Suspense is now our instinct at the edge of the cosmic abyss. The essay spread across the globe, capturing what millions felt but could not articulate. Anticipation had ended, but unease stretched into infinity. For many, these feelings etched themselves deeply into personal lives. A father in Argentina confessed that as he watched Atlas's images with his young son, he wept while feeling a chill down his spine. A student in South Africa wrote in her diary, "I saw it, and I don't know if I am happy or afraid, but I know that from now on, my world will never be the same." And in those quiet words, humanity realized the sobering truth. The suspense had not vanished, it had merely changed shape. From the fear of missing it to the breathless weight of having seen it. Atlas, in its silent presence, had taught us that some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and we, trembling yet compelled, must step through because that is the destiny of a species that longs to know who it is, amid the infinite night of the cosmos. October 2025. Just days after the first close-up images of Atlas were released, the world plunged into a state of unbearable tension. Instead of quenching humanity's curiosity, the images ignited the fuse of an emotional powder keg that had been building for months. People had waited, trembled, and held their breath as Atlas brushed past Mars. But when that moment succeeded, when triumph filled the air, joy had barely cooled before another storm erupted. A global drama where religion, science, media, and art all spun together into a single vortex. In the Vatican, the Pope led a special prayer. St. Peter's Square overflowed with tens of thousands, all gazing upward at a massive screen projecting Atlas, slowly rotating in the void. His voice, trembling yet resolute, rang out, "Perhaps we are witnessing the hand of God within the cosmos." Many worshippers broke down in tears, convinced Atlas was a message from the divine. Yet immediately, scientists protested, arguing that to sanctify an interstellar comet was a manipulation of faith. What began as a prayer turned into a dispute, and the air grew heavier. In Mecca, thousands of pilgrims lifted their eyes to the heavens during their prayers. Some clerics declared Atlas the guest star, a trial of humanity's loyalty to the Almighty. In India, temples erected statues of Shiva, holding a radiant shard of ice, likening Atlas to an eye opening across the universe. In Japan, temple bells rang all night, interpreting Atlas as a wandering spirit drifting through the Milky Way. The religious world, so often divided, suddenly converged upon the same object. Yet it was not harmony that united them, but an undercurrent of rivalry, each tradition struggling to claim Atlas as its own. Meanwhile, the global media became a battlefield. Some outlets suggested that the glowing fissures on Atlas might be traces of artificial design. Within hours, mainstream research institutions dismissed it as dangerous exaggeration. But it was too late. Headlines blared across front pages and screens. Atlas, an alien eye? A divine message in the void? Millions of ordinary people no longer distinguished science from speculation. All they knew was that their hearts raced each time a new theory surfaced, as if every headline were a fragment of destiny. In daily life, public reactions grew wildly contradictory. Some believed Atlas was a harbinger of the apocalypse and rushed into supermarkets to strip the shelves bare. In Los Angeles, graffiti scrawled across a freeway wall screamed, "The end is near, Atlas is watching." Yet in sharp contrast, the younger generation responded with fascination rather than fear. They created endless online forums to decode each pixel of Atlas's images, counting the rhythm of its light pulses, convinced they were deciphering a cosmic code. On TikTok, the hashtag number #DecodeAtlas surged past 1 billion views, turning the planet into one colossal classroom of curiosity. In art, Atlas became an explosive muse. Musicians released songs titled Frozen Messenger and The Eye in the Sky, shooting to the top of Spotify charts. Street artists painted Atlas onto city walls, surrounding it with radiant beams like the gaze of a celestial deity. A Hollywood director announced a new feature film titled Atlas, marketed as based on real events, beyond imagination. Popular culture didn't soothe the tension, it magnified it, transforming Atlas into a symbol at once mystical and theatrical, impossible to ignore. And within this tangled storm where religions wrestled for symbols, the media mined every crack for sensation. Art mythologized it, and the public fractured into extremes. The global atmosphere grew suffocating. No one was merely looking at a distant celestial body anymore. Humanity had become actors in the greatest drama ever staged, with Atlas cast as the central figure, while we, whether willing or not, played the roles of both audience and reluctant participants. Every individual, pulled in by awe, fear, reverence, or curiosity, found themselves swept onto a stage of cosmic theatre. The world itself had turned into a drama of staggering intensity, something unseen in the modern age. After the close-up images of Atlas flooded every screen, the world no longer split neatly between hope and fear. It shattered into dozens of fragments, each fragment a perspective, a belief, a frenzy, and those shards clashed constantly, generating an undercurrent of tension that rippled across the planet. In Washington, a group of lawmakers demanded the creation of an Earth Defense Committee against the Atlas threat. They distrusted scientific reassurances, claiming Atlas might conceal alien technology and that humanity must prepare military contingencies. In Brussels, by contrast, a circle of intellectuals signed a petition urging the world to declare Atlas the shared heritage of humanity, prohibiting any one nation from monopolizing its study or exploitation. The two stances glared at one another, like knives at throats, turning geopolitics into a new arena of conflict. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories spread with terrifying speed. Hundreds of YouTube channels and podcasts pumped out evidence that Atlas was not a natural body. Some insisted the glowing fissures on its surface were windows of a colossal ship. Other animated graphics portray Atlas as an all-seeing eye, silently watching Earth. Still others claimed governments had long known the truth but concealed it from the public. Humanity's thirst for knowledge had mutated into a thirst for information, and in that hunger, people swallowed truth and falsehood alike without distinction. In India, thousands gathered along the Ganges to perform purification rites, convinced that Atlas heralded the dawn of a new cosmic cycle. Across South America, indigenous communities treated Atlas as the returning spirit of the ancestors, erecting makeshift altars and keeping fires burning through the night. In Latin American churches, pastors preached that Atlas was the eye of judgment, urging repentance before it was too late. Awe had tipped into zealotry, pulling millions into spiritual states unseen in the digital age. At the same time, anxiety erupted into social panic. In Los Angeles, long lines of cars snaked toward gas stations after a rumor spread that Atlas would destabilize Earth's climate. In Tokyo, convenience stores were stripped bare of instant noodles overnight because social media whispered that Atlas radiation could trigger global crop failure. The World Health Organization was forced to hold a press conference, denying rumors that an ice virus from Atlas could drift to Earth. Yet the more they denied, the more suspicion grew. Fear had escaped containment, morphing into a psychological epidemic. In culture, curiosity exploded into mania. Netflix rushed out a documentary series titled Inside Atlas within a week, smashing viewership records. Theaters around the world filled, audiences leaving in dazed silence, satiated yet unsettled. On TikTok, the 131-second light pulse of Atlas became a global game. People counted each flicker as though cracking a cosmic riddle. At first it was playful, but soon it turned obsessive. Many confessed they could no longer sleep each time they closed their eyes. Atlas loomed. In Africa, street artists painted Atlas as a colossal eye looming over villages. In South Korea, a K-pop group released a track built around samples of the 131-second pulse, and it shot to the top of the charts. Atlas had become the new heartbeat of popular culture. Yet rather than merely entertain, art mirrored society's deepest fixation, amplifying the collective sense of awe and unease. All these phenomena made the global atmosphere feel like a sealed chamber where billions held their breath together. Tension was no longer a feeling but a tangible force, pressing down on cities, streets, and minds. People went to work but thought of Atlas, ate meals while speaking of Atlas, and fell asleep only to dream of Atlas. Never before had a distant celestial body become so embedded in the daily breath of humanity. And within this suffocation, humanity entered a new stage, the stage of extreme drama, where reverence, fear, and curiosity merged into a whirlpool with no escape. By early November 2025, the global atmosphere had grown almost unbearably suffocating. Atlas, a lifeless shard of ice and dust, had become the epicenter of a war of meaning. Every nation, every religion, every community fought to claim the right to define it. At the United Nations, an emergency summit convened. The US delegation declared, Atlas might contain strategic extraterrestrial data and must be prioritized for national security research. Russia and China immediately pushed back, accusing Washington of trying to privatize the cosmos. The European Union proposed forming an international Atlas Commission to ensure transparency, but distrust between powers blocked the initiative. The chamber reverberated with pounding fists on desks, fierce arguments, moments teetering on chaos. Media outlets dubbed it the Atlas Crisis, comparing it to the Cold War standoffs of the past. While politicians clashed, the public seethed. Protests erupted from Paris to Sao Paulo. Demonstrators split into two camps. One waved banners reading Atlas belongs to humanity, demanding full transparency of the data. The other held placards saying, Don't wake the giant, urging all interference to cease. The two crowds collided often, forcing police to erect steel barricades. The tension in the streets mirrored the tension in the chambers, two reflections facing each other in a hall of mirrors. In the realm of religion, polarization was even fiercer. Certain extremist sects proclaimed Atlas the harbinger of Judgment Day, rallying followers to prepare for the apocalypse. Videos of mass prayer circles, tens of thousands kneeling toward the sky, spread virally. In contrast, other religious groups praised Atlas as a divine gift, hosting festivals of lanterns, trumpets, and hymns of celebration. These extremes, doom and blessing, collided violently, splintering local communities. On social media, anxiety and curiosity fused into grotesque twins. Millions scrutinized every news update, decoding every pixel of every image. One viral video replayed a strange flash of Atlas's light hundreds of millions of times, each viewer attaching a new meaning, an SOS signal, a cosmic cipher, or mere reflection. People could not stop. Atlas had become a global addiction, a colossal puzzle whose prize was the ultimate truth. In scientific circles, the picture was no clearer. Some young researchers dared to say aloud, Atlas is not just a scientific subject, it's a collective psychological phenomenon. But such words drew harsh condemnation. Universities fractured into factions, conservatives demanding restraint, progressives urging the release of all data regardless of risk. Academic conferences devolved into battlegrounds, where every new finding was a gunshot sparking further conflict. In art, the drama escalated as well. A Berlin exhibition displayed dozens of screens projecting magnified images of Atlas, interspersed with mirrors. Visitors stepped into a chamber drenched in eerie blue light, seeing themselves merged with the cosmic ice. Many emerged in tears, admitting they had just experienced a spiritual breakdown. In Hollywood, the trailer for the film Atlas premiered, showing humanity discovering that the comet was in fact an ancient ship. Though fictional, the trailer ignited a new fear. What if this is not just imagination? All of it, politics, religion, media, art, intertwined into a web strung as tight as a violin string. Humanity was no longer merely observing a celestial body. It was being pulled into a crisis of belief unlike anything before. Atlas was no longer a speck of light in the void, but a mirror angled back at the human heart, a place where reverence, fear, and curiosity pressed together until breath itself grew scarce. In that condition, the world teetered on the edge. Everyone knew that just one more anomalous piece of data from Atlas could ignite an explosion, not because the comet might fall, but because of the emotions compressed too long, waiting to detonate. By late November 2025, the world plunged into a chaos unlike anything in living memory. New images and data from Atlas poured in daily, yet instead of clarifying, they thickened the fog of mystery. Inside that fog, global society spun into a storm of belief, where every breath was tight, every moment felt like a climax stretched to the breaking point. In New York, thousands gathered at Times Square not to celebrate, but to protest NASA's ongoing analysis. They carried banners declaring, "Don't open the door that cannot be closed." Directly across from them, another crowd lifted signs screaming, "Let us know the truth." The two groups roared into each other's faces as police erected steel barricades and helicopters circled overhead. The images streamed live on television, humanity acting out a tense drama, with Atlas as its invisible director. In Rome, certain firebrand priests preached that Atlas was the eye of judgment and urged the faithful to prepare for the end of days. Yet in the same city, bands of young worshippers gathered with guitars and candles, singing as though Atlas were God's gift, a beacon of life beyond Earth. Fear and joy collided like opposite electrical currents, charging the atmosphere with unbearable weight. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories reached a fever pitch. A viral video claimed the light from Atlas was encoding a message that governments had already deciphered but were concealing. Within 48 hours, it racked up hundreds of millions of views. People replayed the footage frame by frame, charted graphs, and fought in online forums. Curiosity mutated into collective addiction. Millions stayed awake night after night, eyes burning at their screens, convinced Atlas was whispering a secret meant only for the patient. Even among scientists, anxiety spread like fire. A few laboratories announced their most shocking discovery yet. Organic molecules in Atlas's ice displayed a backbone resembling DNA, but inverted in structure. The revelation was as thrilling as it was terrifying. If Atlas carried the architecture of another life system, could it ever be compatible with us, or would it be lethal? Arguments exploded across journals and newspapers. Each article lit another match, setting the tinder of global fear ablaze. Art, instead of soothing, magnified the turmoil. In London, a stage musical depicted Atlas as a silent titan, watching humanity with cold compassion. Audiences sobbed as the curtain fell. Many confessed they felt so small it hurt to breathe. In South Korea, pop groups released music videos drenched in the comet's eerie glow, timed to the 131-second pulse of its light. The songs rocketed to the top of charts, but fans admitted the rhythms left them both exhilarated and unnerved. On social media, Number Atlas Crisis became the world's hottest hashtag. Every day, millions posted about Atlas, but the content fractured into contradictions, some hailing it as divine proof, others branding it a cosmic threat. still others sneering that the whole saga was a mass psychological experiment. Yet it was precisely this polarization that gave Atlas its grip, turning life itself into a cosmic tragedy, with every human drafted into the cast. At the personal level, tension seeped into family homes. Parents argued over whether children should keep watching Atlas news. Spouses disagreed. One convinced it was a warning, the other swore it was an opportunity. In some places, weddings collapsed because couples could not reconcile what Atlas symbolized. The fractures of belief rattled within households, echoing the wider crisis outside. And through that chaos, one dazzling truth emerged. Atlas was no longer a distant celestial object. It had become the global stage on which humanity performed its most dramatic traits: reverence, fear, curiosity, fanaticism, doubt. People hated Atlas for sowing unease, yet could not look away, like addicts trembling for the next dose. By the end of November, humanity realized it had crossed into a new phase, the point of no return. For Atlas, with its silent mystery, had cast us not as observers but as characters inside its play, and from this moment forward, the world would never be the same, not because Atlas had changed, but because we had changed, simply by gazing into it. December 2025. As the social frenzy slowly began to subside, humanity entered a different phase, the era of technological helplessness. After waves of political disputes, religious ceremonies, and cultural fever, the world returned to the core question. What do we actually know about Atlas? And the brutal answer was, almost nothing at all. Ground-based telescopes produced only blurred images, lacking resolution. Orbiters circling Mars captured nothing more than fragments, fleeting glimpses. The James Webb Space Telescope bent all its infrared power toward the comet, yet the data only deepened contradictions. Complex organic compounds appeared in one spectral frame, only to vanish entirely in another. Numbers refused to align, as though Atlas itself were deliberately misleading us. In a Geneva laboratory, a scientist collapsed over his desk, surrounded by thousands of scrambled data lines. He muttered, "We possess the most powerful technology in history, and yet we stand powerless before a lump of ice and dust." The remark, caught during an interview, spread like wildfire, becoming a symbol of collective impotence. And yet, inside that very impotence, hope for technology flared brighter. The world summoned its most powerful supercomputers, unleashing massive AI algorithms to decipher Atlas's secrets. In the United States, DeepMind partnered with NASA to build simulations of the object's nuclear structure. In China, Tianhe-3, the fastest supercomputer on Earth, devoted its entire capacity to spectral analysis. In Europe, Project Helios linked hundreds of data centers into a virtual brain, all focused on passing the 131-second pulse of Atlas's light. The planet seemed to kneel before a new altar, technology itself. On social media, millions tuned in to watch live data announcements. These live-stream briefings became global rituals, no different from World Cup finals. Every time a new graph appeared, hearts around the world skipped in unison, waiting for a single divergent signal, as though one stray spike of light might save humanity from the spiral of doubt. But time and again, the data betrayed them. Curves that seemed to suggest anomalies failed to converge. One day, an AI declared the discovery of a rare organic compound. The next, another system dismissed it as mere noise. Hope erupted, only to collapse again, hearts squeezed in a cruel cosmic joke. Humanity waited, wearied, and felt powerless, yet could not look away. Thus, Atlas became not merely a physical enigma, but a mirror reflecting the fragility of human knowledge. Technology, long believed to be an invincible blade, turned into a mirror that exposed our own limitations. And paradoxically, that very helplessness only deepened humanity's hunger for data, like wanderers in a desert, clinging desperately to each mirage of water. By January 2026, after supercomputers had run millions of hours analyzing Atlas, what the world received in return was still nothing but a tangle of overlapping results. Instead of clarity, technology had dragged humanity into a state of lingering helplessness. The AI from the DeepMind NASA project released a report hundreds of pages long, concluding there was a high probability that Atlas's ice contained organic molecules resembling the foundations of DNA. Yet only days later, China's Tianhe-3 produced the opposite conclusion. No convincing evidence whatsoever. The two most powerful supercomputers on Earth, analyzing the same source of data, had produced two opposing answers. The scientific community was stunned into silence. A veteran professor at MIT remarked bitterly, "We entrusted our faith to the machines, and now the machines divide us more than ever." That helplessness seeped into the public. Each time a new announcement was scheduled, millions tuned in to live streams, hoping at last to hear a definitive answer. But instead of certainty, they were handed hesitation. One day, the headline flashed across screens, "Possible prebiotic compounds detected in Atlas." The entire world erupted in hope. Thousands of celebratory videos flooded social media, and children drew Atlas beside the double helix of DNA. Yet the next day, another report denied it all. The joy collapsed into disappointment, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste. People compared following Atlas's data to following the moods of a silent god, granting blessings one day, rescinding them the next. International conferences began to resemble tense court trials. In Geneva, a young researcher broke down in tears at the podium, confessing that her team had worked day and night, yet still could not unravel the mystery of the 131-second pulse of light. "We are powerless," she said, "but we continue, because perhaps one day the data will finally yield its secret." The hall fell silent. Many eyes grew wet, for everyone saw themselves in her confession, exhausted yet unable to stop. Among the public, faith in technology morphed into something close to religion. Whenever NASA, ESA, or CNSA released new findings, millions gathered before screens as if attending a ritual. Families huddled around dining tables, embracing in living rooms, whispering prayers that the numbers might bring hope. In some cities, cafes hosted Atlas Data Nights, where crowds watched the streams together, cheering when a new spike appeared on a graph, falling quiet when the report ended in uncertainty. Online, a new phrase emerged, the data flock, a name for those who believed the data would one day liberate humanity from doubt. They wrote long blogs, dissecting every chart, every wave, convinced the truth lay hidden somewhere, waiting for technology strong enough to reveal it. In contrast, skeptics derided them as blind believers, arguing that humanity was building a new religion, the worship of technology, and that Atlas had become its ultimate idol. Journalists described the situation as the disease of waiting. The entire planet seemed addicted to data updates. In the morning, people no longer asked, "What's the weather today?" but rather, "What did Atlas reveal today?" That curiosity made humanity feel both alive and exhausted, as though suspended on a fragile wire stretched between hope and despair. Thus, Atlas became a magnifying glass, exposing humanity's fragility before its own machines. We waited for data as though for a promise of salvation, yet every time the numbers arrived, our helplessness only deepened. For the cruel truth was this: it wasn't that technology was insufficient, it was that the very nature of Atlas might lie beyond the grasp of human understanding. February 2026, reports kept being published only to be refuted again and again. Helplessness was no longer confined to the laboratories, it had spread into a full-blown crisis of faith in technology. In Washington, a congressional committee grilled NASA. Why, with a budget of tens of billions of dollars, can you still not give the public a clear answer about Atlas? The head of the project lowered his eyes. We have all the data, but the data contradicts itself. It's not that we're hiding anything, it's that we cannot explain it. That reply sent shockwaves through America. The press called it a reverse Galileo moment instead of opening new knowledge. Atlas was suffocating scientific confidence. In China, Tianhe 3 faced the same pressure. Public opinion accused the government of concealing earth-shattering discoveries. But when the data was finally released, it turned out to be nothing more than strings of charts, meaningless to ordinary people. Disappointment spread, and faith in technology wavered. A blogger wrote, "We once thought AI was divine, but Atlas has rendered that god silent." The post went viral, birthing a new catchphrase: "If AI doesn't know, humanity is blind." Within the scientific community, divisions became deep cracks. International conferences now resembled public tribunals. One camp insisted Atlas was evidence of panspermia, the seeding of life across the cosmos. The other fought back fiercely, arguing that every signal was a natural phenomenon. Neither side would yield, and humanity's worldview splintered into shards. A renowned physicist sighed, "I no longer know whether I'm researching to find the truth, or just to prove my faction right." Among the public, data addiction evolved into a disappointment syndrome. Live streams of new data still drew millions, but the mood had grown heavy. When a new graph appeared, the crowd no longer hoped, they simply braced themselves to sigh. Some mocked. Atlas isn't a celestial body, it's the universe's cruel joke. Yet immediately, others whispered, maybe next time will be different. That tug of war left society in a state of despair. It couldn't quit. On social media, the so-called data flock grew more extreme. They treated every fragment of data like scripture, writing interpretations dozens of pages long, insisting scientists had overlooked hidden meaning. A new movement arose, called People's Science. Anyone could download Atlas data and interpret it for themselves. Millions joined in, spawning billions of hypotheses. But the more voices arose, the further the truth receded. Atlas was no longer an object of study. It had become a colossal mirror, magnifying the chaos of human knowledge. In popular culture, helplessness itself became fuel for creation. A documentary titled The Silent Data went viral, showing supercomputers running at full power, only to print the line, "No conclusion possible." Audiences left theaters in silence, many with tears in their eyes, because they saw their own helplessness reflected there. In South Korea, a band released the song Error 131, capturing the human heartbeat, syncing with Atlas's flickering light, yearning and despair woven together. All these phenomena forged a bitter paradox. The stronger the technology, the greater the helplessness. Humanity stood before Atlas like a student clutching a math book too difficult to solve. The more they read, the more lost they became. Yet they could not throw the book away, because they knew it contained the answer to their very existence. And so, despite the exhaustion, the world clung to every number, every pixel, as though technology were the only fragile rope keeping them from falling into the abyss of doubt. March 2026. Winter had just passed, but the world remained frozen in the chill of helplessness. After months of analysis, debates, publications, and rebuttals, humanity realized it had not moved an inch forward. Data was no longer a lighthouse but a darkened labyrinth. Supercomputers kept running, laboratories burned their lights through the night, yet the numbers returned only reinforced one brutal truth. Atlas remained silent. At an international conference in Geneva, when the moderator asked, "How much progress have we made compared to 3 months ago?" the hall fell still. An American scientist sighed. "We have advanced by 1,000,000 gigabytes of data, but not a single step closer to the truth." The remark was splashed across newspapers, turned into a headline. Mountains of data, empty of knowledge. And yet, paradoxically, in that darkness, faith in technology was sanctified even further. The public awaited each new data release as if it were a prophecy. Television channels launched segments called the Atlas Hour, where scientists presented their latest findings. Each time a new graph appeared on screen, millions of hearts clenched. They knew disappointment might follow once more, but still they watched, because it was the only thread of hope keeping them from plunging into the abyss of meaninglessness. In Seoul, a cafe introduced data nights. Customers gathered to watch Atlas livestream updates, sipping coffee and debating each spike and curve. In São Paulo, public squares turned into open-air theaters for Atlas projections, where citizens brought plastic chairs and stayed past midnight. In Nairobi, schools showed the Atlas bulletin before morning classes, calling it the cosmic lesson. These images revealed how data itself had transformed into a collective ritual. Humanity was powerless, but could not let go. In culture, this tension reverberated powerfully. A documentary titled Waiting for Data premiered, offering no climax, only scenes of people sitting before screens, waiting for numbers to appear. Yet audiences left in tears, realizing the film was a mirror of their own lives. In Japan, a best-selling novel portrayed Atlas as a mute deity who spoke only in fragments of data. Readers devoured each page, feeling both suspense and despair, as though reliving the global experience itself. Within the scientific world, morale was fraying. A Canadian research team admitted, "After 6 months, we no longer believe current data is sufficient to decipher Atlas. We may need to wait for the next generation of technology." The confession cut like a knife through public faith, but almost instantly, a new movement surged. We must grow stronger. Campaigns called for building bigger telescopes, faster supercomputers, and bolder probes. Humanity, though powerless, refused to surrender. Deep down, they believed that with just one new leap in technology, the wall of silence would crack. Thus, Atlas became not merely an astronomical puzzle, but a test of humanity's faith in its own creations. We knew today's tools were inadequate, yet we could not abandon the belief that tomorrow's would be different. We wept in frustration even as we clung tighter to our fragile lifeline. Data. As March came to a close, a journalist wrote in the Times, "Atlas is a colossal mirror. It reflects not only the cosmos, but also our helplessness, our waiting, our longing. We asked it for the secret of life, and it answered with silence. Yet in that silence, we heard our own echo most clearly. And perhaps that was the greatest paradox of all. Never had humanity been so powerless, yet never had it hoped so fiercely." Summer 2026. After half a year drowning in the futility of data and endless disputes, humanity unexpectedly stumbled upon another path, not through absolute answers, but through the convergence of knowledge. Atlas, instead of being a wall of silence, had become the catalyst for an academic exhilaration unlike anything in history. Paris, June. At UNESCO headquarters, the Atlas Summit of the Century opened. This was not merely a scientific gathering, but a global event where more than 120 nations sent delegates from leading physicists to philosophers, artists, and even religious leaders. The Grand Hall was full, while outside, tens of thousands of students and citizens crowded into the square, following along on giant screens. The proceedings were live-streamed to hundreds of millions across the planet. The atmosphere was nothing like a dry academic symposium. It felt like the Olympic Games of human intellect. When the first speaker, a quantum physicist from Japan, stepped to the podium, the hall fell silent. He presented a hypothesis that Atlas's 131-second flickering might be linked to subatomic oscillations, a universal physical language never before identified by humankind. When he finished, the room erupted in thunderous applause. Many rose to their feet. No one knew whether the hypothesis was right or wrong, but the courage to pose a new question ignited a fierce energy. The feeling that humanity was brushing against the threshold of uncharted knowledge. Next, a biologist from Brazil unveiled research on traces of organic compounds in Atlas's ice, suggesting the possibility of an alternative recipe for life, a biology not based on DNA as we know it. Murmurs swept through the hall, half astonishment, half anticipation. A Greek philosopher followed, arguing that Atlas was not just a scientific object but a metaphysical mirror, forcing humanity to pause and contemplate its own place in the vast cosmos. Each speaker offered a perspective, a fragment of thought, but together they formed a polyphonic symphony of scholarship, where science and the humanities did not oppose each other, but intertwined. The most moving moment came when NASA and CNSA representatives, usually bitter rivals, stepped onto the stage together to sign the Atlas Accord. The document pledged that all Atlas data would be shared openly, treating knowledge as the collective heritage of humanity. The entire hall rose in applause, many in tears. Millions of online viewers around the globe also wept. For the first time in decades, humanity witnessed a unity of knowledge that transcended borders. And it wasn't only in Paris. The exhilaration spread across the planet. In Mexico City, universities held public lectures. Students and ordinary citizens packed into auditoriums to hear about Atlas. In Nairobi, elementary school children were assigned essays titled, "If Atlas Could Speak, What Would It Say?" Their innocent answers moved teachers to tears. In Sydney, theatres staged musicals built around the 131-second rhythm, audiences clapping along as though their hearts were synchronized with the pulse of the universe. On social media, Number Atlas Summit shot to the top of global trends. Short clips of tearful audiences, or scientists clasping hands despite national differences, spread at lightning speed. Twitter users called it the Woodstock of the mind, while a European newspaper wrote, "If world wars once divided us, Atlas has by some miracle drawn us closer together, if only for this fleeting moment." What was astonishing was that participation was not limited to science. Artists, writers, and musicians joined in. A symphony orchestra in Vienna performed the Atlas Symphony, weaving the 131-second rhythm throughout the entire piece. A collective of African painters opened an exhibition depicting Atlas as a giant eye reflecting humanity. In New York, a novelist released a book imagining Atlas as a mirror that tested humanity's soul. The novel instantly became a bestseller. In those days, humanity felt something extraordinary. Atlas was no longer just a distant block of ice and dust. It was a bridge between knowledge and feeling, between science and the humanities, between human and human. And the shared emotion resonating everywhere was not fear or helplessness, but a flood of exhilaration, the sense that we, fragile as we are, could still unite to face the universe together. After the Atlas Summit in Paris, the wave of academic exhilaration swept across the globe like an unstoppable storm. What was astonishing was that, for the first time in decades, no discipline stood apart. From medicine, climate science, and artificial intelligence to art and religion, every field found a reason to tie its destiny to Atlas. In Geneva, the World Health Organization convened an emergency conference not for a pandemic, but for Atlas data. Doctors and biologists asked, if the organic compounds were confirmed, could they inspire breakthroughs in biotechnology, new medicines, or even one-day cures for humanity's deadliest diseases? The hall throbbed with anticipation. A South African HIV specialist spoke through tears. Atlas may not carry life, but it may carry the clue to saving life. In climate science, researchers saw Atlas as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Its icy surface, irregular orbit, and strange chemistry raised urgent questions. Could this data help humanity better grasp the fragility of Earth? In the Arctic, a group of young scientists launched a project called Atlas Mirror, comparing Atlas ice data with polar melt. They declared, every grain of ice in Atlas may tell us a story about our own planet. Artificial intelligence also became a protagonist of this new wave. Labs in California, Beijing, Berlin, and Bangalore joined to form the Atlas AI Alliance. Their mission? Use machine learning to parse every fragment of Atlas data, but this time in a spirit of openness and global sharing, not rivalry. When the first open-source model was released, hundreds of thousands of programmers downloaded it, contributing their own algorithms. Online forums pulsed with energy like a software revolution, where everyone felt part of humanity's greatest collaborative project. And it wasn't only scientists. Ordinary people joined in. In Rio de Janeiro, Copacabana Beach turned into an open-air classroom, thousands sitting in the sand listening to lectures about Atlas chemistry projected on giant screens. In New Delhi, schools organized Atlas Day, with children competing in art, poetry, and science storytelling. A 10-year-old wrote, Atlas is like a teacher in the sky, silent, but making us want to learn more. The essay went viral, shared millions of times, leaving readers in tears. In the arts, exhilaration burst into creativity. In Berlin, a collective of visual artists staged 131 seconds, a darkened room where light pulsed to Atlas's rhythm, drawing visitors into the heartbeat of the cosmos. In Los Angeles, a renowned director announced plans for a science fiction film inspired by the Paris summit, but emphasized, this isn't a movie about a comet, it's about humanity when faced with a shared mystery. The most miraculous element was global unity. On social media, the hashtag number Atlas Generation spread, defining the present cohort as the Atlas Generation, the first to treat knowledge as a shared foundation beyond politics. Viral videos showed students in Cairo, Toronto, Lagos, and Tokyo debating Atlas data together online, as though the planet itself had become a vast classroom. The atmosphere left people both exhilarated and trembling. They knew no final answers had yet been reached, but the sense of unity of collective human intellect, advancing step by step, was enough to make these days feel historic. As one journalist wrote, Atlas has done what centuries of politics could not. It has brought us to sit together, to share knowledge, and to wait in awe. By the autumn of 2026, the wave of academic exhilaration had transformed into a global cultural phenomenon. Atlas no longer belonged solely to scientific conferences or distant laboratories. It had seeped into schools, public squares, museums, theatres, and even the smallest corners of daily life. In Cambridge and Oxford, the ancient lecture halls once hushed and reserved were now overflowing with students and ordinary citizens alike. New extension courses titled Atlas Studies attracted tens of thousands of registrants, engineers and artists, retirees and high schoolers. A professor remarked with wonder, I've never seen knowledge become so universal, so passionately desired. Atlas has turned the whole world into one shared classroom. In Beijing, Tsinghua University and Peking University jointly hosted an Atlas hackathon that stretched over 48 hours. Thousands of young programmers from across the globe worked side by side, developing open-source tools to process Atlas data. The stadium-turned-tech hub glowed with the light of laptop screens, the rapid-fire keystrokes rising like the soundtrack of a new era. At the closing ceremony, an Indian-Nigerian student team was honored for creating an algorithm that cut spectral analysis time by 40%. They embraced one another through tears, defying the barriers of language and nationality. In South America, the movement Atlas for Every Home spread quickly. In Buenos Aires, cafes launched Atlas Nights, where patrons sipped espresso while debating the latest scientific hypotheses. In Santiago, street artists painted massive murals of Atlas as a radiant eye gazing down at human figures holding hands. The murals soon became tourist attractions, symbols of a new global solidarity. Across Africa, this spirit burned brightly. In Lagos, a coalition of universities founded the Atlas Institute Africa, inviting students across the continent to contribute to research. Their mission stretched beyond pure science, asking, "What can Atlas teach us about Earth's fragility and our shared responsibility?" In Nairobi, a high school teacher wrote on the chalkboard, "We study Atlas, but in truth, we are studying ourselves." Students photographed the phrase and posted it online, where it quickly became a generational motto. In North America and Europe, museums joined the movement. London's Natural History Museum opened Echoes of Atlas, an exhibit displaying data, imagery, and 3D models of the comet's structure. Hundreds of thousands queued to witness a holographic rendering of the 131-second light pulse. Children cheered, while adults stood in reverent silence. An 80-year-old woman whispered, "I never thought I would live to see this." Media outlets dubbed the phenomenon the Global Festival of Knowledge. The New York Times wrote, "Atlas is not merely a celestial body. It is the catalyst making humanity joyful for learning, for connection, for living together inside one great question." The BBC compared the era to the Renaissance, an age where knowledge flourished and the arts and sciences blended seamlessly. What grew strongest in these months was anticipation. The public awaited each conference, each report, each artistic unveiling, as if they were world sporting events or major concerts. Live streams drew hundreds of millions, with comment threads scrolling endlessly across screens. One viewer declared, "We don't need a World Cup, we already have the Atlas Cup of knowledge." In these moments, humanity realized that unity does not always come from fear or crisis. It can also arise from the shared thrill of discovery, the collective heartbeat that pulses when we all look upward together and ask, "Who are we, and what is Atlas trying to teach us?" Winter 2026. The academic exhilaration reached its zenith. In New York, inside the United Nations headquarters, the Atlas Global Forum was convened, a gathering unlike any before, where not only politicians but thousands of scholars, artists, social activists, and young students joined together. The theme was not military strategy, nor trade, but a single, disarmingly simple question: what does Atlas mean to us? On opening day, the UN Secretary-General addressed the packed chamber. "We may disagree on politics, religion, economics, but Atlas has given us an unexpected opportunity to confront a shared mystery together. This is the moment humanity must choose: either divide and miss it, or unite and step into a new era." His words, broadcast live to hundreds of millions, ignited standing ovations. Across the world, viewers embraced one another, many in tears. The centerpiece of the forum was the birth of the Atlas Charter of Knowledge, a 20-page document signed by more than 150 nations and hundreds of academic institutions. The charter declared that knowledge of Atlas belonged to all humanity. No single entity had the right to monopolize it. It pledged open data, shared technology, cross-border collaboration, and, most strikingly, the integration of Atlas studies into school curricula worldwide. When the charter was projected onto the giant screen, the entire chamber rose in applause that lasted several minutes. The press hailed it as a historic moment for human knowledge. In parallel, Atlas festivals unfolded across the globe. In London, over 200,000 people crowded Hyde Park for a massive outdoor science fair. Children experimented with ice models of Atlas, adults listened to lectures on its orbit, and a famous band played music set to the rhythm of 131 seconds. In Tokyo, the giant LED screens of Shibuya broadcast the conference live. Crowds halted in the streets, clapping along with the applause in New York. In Lagos, A hybrid concert fused scientific talks with dance and music. Audiences both celebrated and contemplated Atlas's philosophical meaning. Media outlets declared this the Atlas era. Le Monde wrote, "After decades of crisis and doubt, humanity has at last found a shared reason to unite: knowledge." A columnist for The Washington Post observed, "If Apollo took humans to the moon, Atlas has brought humanity closer to one another." What was most remarkable was that anticipation never diminished. Each time new data was released, the world collectively held its breath. No one expected Atlas to deliver definitive answers, but the waiting itself had transformed. No longer haunted by helplessness, it had become a global ritual of exhilaration. Humanity had learned to savor the journey of inquiry, not only crave the destination. In the arts, 2026 closed with a singular performance, Symphony of Silence, staged simultaneously in 12 major cities across the globe. Each orchestra played in sync, connected through satellite, creating the first global symphony in history. When the final note faded, audiences in New York, Paris, Cairo, Seoul, and Mexico City rose together in ovation. In that instant, borders seemed to dissolve. Atlas, a remote body of ice and dust, had accomplished the unimaginable, turning its silence into a shared symphony for humankind. And humanity, for the first time in centuries, felt not like a collection of fractured nations, but a global community of knowledge, exhilarated, breathless, united in looking upward to the cosmos. As 2026 drew to a close, a young scientist wrote in her journal, "Atlas has not answered a single question, but it has taught us this: the value lies not in the answer, but in humanity's act of asking together." Perhaps that, above all, was Atlas's greatest legacy. The year 2027 opened under a strange atmosphere. After the festivals of knowledge in 2026, when the planet had briefly united in a wave of academic exhilaration, a different kind of stillness began to spread. Humanity no longer erupted in cheers at new data, nor buzzed over conflicting hypotheses. Instead, people began to sink into deep philosophical reflection, the quiet aftermath of euphoria, like a slow dawn after a night of celebration. In Europe, philosophy lecture halls are filled as never before. At the Sorbonne, an elderly professor wrote on the board, "Is Atlas a natural phenomenon or a mirror of existence?" Then he quoted Camus, "The universe is silent to our questions, and in that absurdity we find freedom." Students sat in silence, then broke into fierce debate. Some insisted Atlas's silence was a challenge. Others argued it was an invitation for humanity to redefine itself. In Germany, existentialists invoked Sartre. "Man is condemned to be free." They asked, "If Atlas never sends us a clear signal, then perhaps the responsibility for meaning does not lie with the universe, but with us." Meanwhile, in India, Buddhist monasteries held special Dharma talks. Monks looked at Atlas not as a riddle to be solved, but as the Dharmakaya of the cosmos, a reminder that silence itself is a teaching of impermanence and letting go. In the Middle East, Islamic scholars compared Atlas to the ayat signs of God in the Quran, not to provide answers, but to remind humanity of the limits of human understanding. The traditions differed: philosophical, religious, cultural, but they all converged at one point. Atlas had moved beyond science. It had become a philosophical and spiritual symbol, forcing humanity to gaze back at itself. Alongside hope, a quieter dread began to form. An American philosopher warned in his new book, "We are not afraid of Atlas, we are afraid of the emptiness it reflects." He argued that humans depend on answers to maintain a sense of control, but Atlas offered none. Its silence was like an abyss, making many tremble at the thought that perhaps humanity may never fully comprehend the universe. In popular culture, Atlas became a powerful philosophical motif. In South Korea, the art film Silent Orbit was screened almost entirely without dialogue, alternating only between images of Atlas and contemplative human faces. Audiences left the theatre in silence, many in tears, saying they felt as if they had come face to face with their own soul. In the United States, a wave of best-selling speculative philosophical novels appeared, in which protagonists wrestled with a single question: if Atlas were conscious, what would it want from us? These books sold not because they promised answers, but because they gave voice to humanity's shared existential bewilderment. Young people were especially drawn to Atlas's philosophical side. In California, a startup named itself Atlas Mind, with the slogan, Ask the questions that have no answers. In Nairobi, philosophy students founded the Atlas Club, where they read Sartre and Rumi while also debating the latest scientific data. On social media, the hashtag #AtlasPhilosophy spread like wildfire, with millions sharing their own reflections from the fear of insignificance to the hope that this mystery might open new doors of discovery. And in that very intersection between hope, fear, and the urge to explore, Atlas became humanity's philosophical mirror. It offered no answers, yet compelled billions to ask questions. Not only, what is Atlas? But also, who are we, and who do we wish to become in this universe? By the summer of 2027, philosophical dialogues about Atlas had spread so widely that they no longer belonged only to academia or religion. They appeared in cafes, on online forums, in international halls, and even on street performance stages. Atlas had become a common subject for all of humanity, like a giant mirror suspended in the sky, forcing everyone, rich or poor, intellectual or ordinary, to look into it and ask questions. In Athens, the ancient Agora Square once again became a center of philosophy. Existential professors held public discussions, surrounded by students, workers, and tourists. A young philosopher stood and declared loudly, "If Atlas is silent, then silence itself is the message." The question is, do we have the courage to listen? The crowd went quiet for a moment, then burst into applause. In that instant, everyone felt they were part of a debate, stretching from Socrates to Camus. Only this time, the teacher was the cosmos. In Tokyo, Zen monks organized collective meditation nights. Hundreds of people sat motionless, gazing toward the starry sky, imagining Atlas somewhere out there. A Zen master whispered, "Do not ask Atlas, let Atlas ask you." The phrase spread quickly as a kind of modern koan, drawing many to meditation not to solve the mystery, but to listen to their own minds. Meanwhile, in New York, the United Nations hosted the Global Philosophical Conference on Atlas. For the first time, philosophers, theologians, scientists, and artists sat at the same table. A Christian theologian debated an atheist astrophysicist. A Sufi poet recited verses beside a scientific presentation. These dialogues were not meant to reach consensus, but to reveal the diversity of interpretations. And in that very diversity, humanity felt it was touching the deeper layers of existence. Alongside hope, an undercurrent of fear grew stronger. Many worried that if an answer did come, it might be too overwhelming for humanity to bear. A German philosopher wrote, "We are like children knocking on the door of a dark room. We hope someone answers, but if the door swings open and what's inside is terrifying, will we regret it?" The essay went viral, keeping many awake at night. Atlas, though it did nothing, planted in human minds the fear of knowledge beyond control. Yet within that fear, a new spark of inspiration flickered, the drive to explore. At Cape Canaveral, NASA announced a bold new plan, the launch of a next-generation probe named Odyssey, designed not just to observe from afar but to approach Atlas directly on its next orbit. When the news broke, millions watching online erupted in cheers. A student wrote on a forum, "We are afraid, but we cannot stop. Atlas has taught us that discovery is humanity's deepest instinct." In Europe, ESA launched the Horizon Atlas program, blending scientific data with humanistic philosophy, encouraging students to study physics and philosophy side by side. A journalist remarked, "For the first time, we are treating knowledge not only as something to know, but as something to understand, our very existence." In popular culture, the mix of hope, fear, and discovery found vivid expression. A British rock band released an album titled The Silent Teacher, each track offering a different interpretation of Atlas's silence. The album shot to the top of the charts, striking a chord with millions who felt both unsettled and captivated, drawn helplessly toward the allure of mystery. The world seemed to enter a phase where every day carried a philosophical hue. People woke not only to work, but to ask, what does Atlas mean to humanity? And gradually, humanity realized, Atlas did not need to give us an answer. It had already fulfilled its role by compelling the entire planet to ask the same question. Autumn of 2027. The philosophical tide surrounding Atlas was no longer confined to academia or religion. It had swelled into a global existential wave. The entire planet seemed to be staring into a vast mirror hanging in the sky. The mirror of Atlas. In New York, a conference titled The Human Question was held at Carnegie Hall. The speakers were not only professors or scholars, but also poets, musicians, and even ordinary people invited to share their personal experiences. A middle-aged woman broke into tears as she confessed that every night she looked up at the sky and wondered if Atlas was looking back at her. The hall fell silent, then the audience rose in unison and applauded. It became clear, the greatness of Atlas was not in what it was, but in how it had turned private bewilderment into a shared experience for all of humanity. In Berlin, an art exhibition called Mirror of Silence drew tens of thousands of visitors. The galleries were stark white, each containing only a single screen projecting Atlas slowly rotating. Visitors stepped in and saw their own reflections faintly blended with the comet's glowing orbit. Many walked out trembling, as though they had just encountered the deepest version of themselves. Meanwhile, in Rio de Janeiro, Copacabana Beach transformed into an open-air lecture hall. Thousands sat on the sand, listening to a young philosopher proclaim, "Atlas is a paradox. We crave answers, but if the answers are too alien, will we have the courage to accept them?" The crowd sat quietly, the crash of waves filling the silence, echoing the heartbeat of humanity itself before a mystery. The undercurrent of fear grew sharper. Philosophical journals warned of a knowledge abyss. The more we learned about Atlas, the smaller we felt. An article in Britain posed the dilemma: if Atlas proves that life is common, we must redefine our place in the cosmos. But if it proves that life is rare, we must face absolute loneliness. Either outcome left humanity trembling. It was as if Atlas held two possible scripts, and both made us shiver. And yet, paradoxically, it was within this fear that the urge to explore ignited more fiercely. Nations announced new space programs. In the United States, Project Odyssey accelerated. In China, the Tianwen-3 mission was approved. In Europe, ESA unveiled plans for ExoAtlas, a probe designed to chase the comet's strange orbit. These announcements were embraced by the public. Online, someone wrote, "We may be afraid, but we must still go. If we don't, we will never know who we are." In daily life, Atlas became a subject of constant reflection. In cafes, people debated the meaning of silence. In classrooms, students wrote essays with the prompt, "If Atlas is a question, where does the answer lie?" A 15-year-old in Canada wrote, "Perhaps Atlas is not a question about the universe at all, but about ourselves." The teacher gave it top marks, and the essay went viral, touching millions around the world. Across the globe, people began to realize something profound. Atlas had changed the way humanity engaged with knowledge. It did not promise quick answers. It forced us to accept waiting, to accept silence, even to accept fear. And in doing so, it gave the journey meaning. People no longer sought just to satisfy curiosity, but to understand their purpose in the vastness of existence. And so, Atlas ceased to be merely a celestial body. It became an existential mirror, where hope, fear, and the drive to explore converged, compelling humankind to reflect on its true mission, not to find every answer, but to keep moving forward in an endless quest. By the end of 2027, after countless conferences, exhibitions, and long nights of philosophical dialogue, humanity entered a new state, one of quiet contemplation. Atlas, the drifting mass of ice and dust in the cosmos, had not spoken, had not sent a single clear signal, and yet it was precisely that silence that had transformed humankind more than any definitive answer ever could. In Paris, a group of philosophers released the Atlas Existential Manifesto. It began with the words, "We look to Atlas, not to find absolute truth, but to see the contours of our own limits." The manifesto was quickly translated into dozens of languages and spread across academic forums as well as social media. Millions shared it, each adding their own reflections. "I feel small, but I also feel part of something greater." In Kyoto, a mass meditation was held at an ancient temple. More than 1,000 people sat in silence for 2 hours, their gaze fixed on a projected image of Atlas slowly rotating. When the ceremony ended, many wept, saying it was the first time they had felt the universe not as something distant, but as though it was speaking in silence to the very core of their being. In New York, a Broadway theater staged a play titled The Question We Are. It told the story of an ordinary family debating the meaning of Atlas over dinner. There were no cosmic visuals, no special effects, only conversations filled with philosophy, fear, hope, helplessness, and ultimately, the decision to keep moving forward. The play struck a deep chord because the audience recognized themselves in the characters, each person living out the same question called Atlas. In the scientific community, the spirit had shifted as well. Where once there was tension over the lack of answers, now there was a growing acceptance of ambiguity. A physicist at CERN wrote, "Atlas has taught us a rare virtue in science, patience with the unknown, and it is precisely that patience that opens the door to genuine discovery." The essay became widely shared among students across the globe, serving as a quiet reminder. Still, the hidden fear never vanished. Many worried that one day new data from Atlas would bring a truth too terrifying to bear, that life might exist out there but remain indifferent, or worse, that we truly were alone. This fear lingered like a shadow beside the light of hope. Yet instead of paralyzing people, it made them cherish each fleeting moment of existence even more. And within that paradox, the inspiration to explore flared again. The year 2027 closed with a cascade of new space initiatives. NASA and ESA formally announced a joint mission to launch the Odyssey probe in 2031. China and India declared plans for a collaborative research craft. The African Union unveiled a project to observe Atlas from the continent itself. The atmosphere felt like a second renaissance this time, not born of Europe alone, but of the entire planet. On social media, the hashtag #AtlasInsideMe went viral, encouraging people to write about how Atlas had changed them. One person wrote, "I've learned to accept uncertainty." Another shared, "I've come to love my planet more." Someone else admitted, "I no longer fear death the way I once did." Each reflection was small, but together they formed a shared spiritual archive of humanity. And so, as 2027 came to an end, a quiet resonance settled over the world. Atlas had revealed no secrets, but it had given humanity a greater gift, a philosophical mirror reflecting the essence of existence itself. In its silence, people had discovered hope, fear, and the unquenchable urge to explore the three forces that make us who we are. A young philosopher in South Africa wrote the final line of his journal, "Atlas never spoke, but it made us begin a dialogue with the universe, with each other, and with ourselves. And perhaps that is the answer." The year 2028, the night sky slowly returned to its familiar face, the ancient stars reclaiming their dominion. Atlas was still there, but no longer blazed as before. It faded in the telescopes, like a guest who had quietly slipped away from a long feast. The world that had once trembled, panicked, and raged in its presence now entered a different season, a season of deep reflection. No more heated debates, no more sensational slogans, only moments of stillness, when humanity looked back on its journey and asked, "How has Atlas changed us?" In Paris, a young poet stood on the stage of a modest hall and read a short verse. "We searched for signals, but Atlas gave us silence. We waited for answers, but Atlas gifted us questions. And in that space, we found ourselves." The hall fell into absolute quiet. No one dared clap, as if afraid to shatter the sanctity of the moment. Many left with reddened eyes, carrying the sense that Atlas had imparted a lesson beyond words. In Nairobi, a group of young people gathered in a humble cafe, sharing how Atlas had altered them. One young woman confessed, "I used to fear death, to dread the void. But Atlas showed me that I don't need every answer to live fully. Perhaps meaning lies in the journey, not the destination." Her words spread online, shared by millions. On the walls of schools across Kenya, the phrase was written again and again. Live with the question, not with the answer. We can just not trosses of these repritas, in got from the ound, the no days repers, and there were dog time. In Kyoto, within an ancient temple, hundreds sat in meditation before a projection of Atlas slowly rotating on the wall. When the session ended, a Zen master spoke. "Atlas is a wordless teaching. It is silent, and we learn to be silent with it." Many broke into tears. They realized how much noise they had carried, how fiercely they had clung to control, and how Atlas, through its quiet, had become a medicine for the spirit. Even in science, reflection took root. After years of chasing data, comparing, and disputing, many researchers began to accept that perhaps Atlas would never reveal all its secrets. An astrophysicist at Harvard wrote, "The strange thing is that the more powerless I feel, the more grateful I am to Atlas. It reminds me that science is not about conquering the cosmos, but about learning humility before it. The statement was reprinted across journals, becoming a symbol of a new generation of scientists, no longer chasing illusions of power, but learning to stand before uncertainty. Alongside this quiet reflection came reverence. At the Vatican, the Pope held a final prayer for Atlas, calling it the visiting star that taught humanity a great lesson in smallness and in faith. In mosques, many imams preached that Atlas was an ayat, a sacred sign, reminding humans to give thanks for being witnesses to the universe. In India, temples still hung images of Atlas as Shiva's eye, not in expectation of a signal, but as a reminder that life is fragile and therefore sacred. And within reverence, hope quietly sprouted. Humanity no longer demanded that Atlas resolve everything, but understood that countless other questions lay beyond. If Atlas had not answered, perhaps another celestial body would. If Atlas had remained silent, perhaps its very silence was an invitation for humanity to continue onward. Space agencies unveiled long-term plans. Odyssey to launch in 2031, ESA's ExoAtlas underway, and the African Union funding new telescopes. These projects were no longer just technology, but carried within them the flame of hope left behind by Atlas. Beneath all these layers of emotion, a kind of awakening began to spread. Atlas was no longer an outer question, but had become an inner mirror. It offered no answers, yet through it, humanity had learned to ask better, to live more awake, and to treasure its brief existence with new reverence. As Atlas dimmed from the sky in 2028, something strange unfolded. Its fading did not leave a void, but instead created a space for collective healing. After years of living under tension, doomsday panic, religious fervor, political division, intellectual chaos, humanity finally found the chance to sit down, exhale, and mend. In South Africa, a psychologist launched a community therapy program called Letters to Atlas. People were encouraged to write to the comet as if it were a friend who had departed. Thousands of letters poured in, many trembling with raw confession. "Thank you for scaring me, so I know I am still alive. I once hated you for stealing my sleep, but now I see you woke me up." Public readings of the letters became group therapy sessions, where tears and laughter mingled, helping people realize that they were not alone in their fear, nor in their hope. In Tokyo, neighborhood groups began holding Atlas silent nights. Residents turned off all the lights and sat outdoors together, not talking, not debating. Only breath, wind, and the night sky remained. One participant shared, "We once made so much noise about Atlas. Now we've learned to be silent with it." The ritual spread to other cities, evolving into a form of mass meditation where millions found balance after years of turmoil. Across Europe, schools wove Atlas Day into their curricula. Children were encouraged to paint, to write poems, or simply describe how they felt when they looked at the sky. A teacher in Italy remarked, "This is not only an astronomy lesson, it is a lesson in feeling." They are learning to face uncertainty and still find beauty in it. The children's works, Atlas as a friend, a teacher, or a quiet star, became symbols of a generation growing up more awake. In religion, instead of competing to claim Atlas as a symbol, communities began moving toward reconciliation. In Jerusalem, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian leaders gathered for a joint prayer. For the first time in decades, they stood side by side not to assert their own truth, but to acknowledge the silence of the cosmos. A rabbi said, "Atlas has made us silent, and in that silence we discovered we could pray together." The scene was broadcast worldwide, touching millions of hearts and planting a fragile hope for harmony. In medicine, the term Atlas syndrome emerged, used to describe the stress, confusion, and psychological unrest of the previous years. But rather than treating it as trauma, many psychologists began reframing it as an opportunity for healing. Therapy sessions encouraged patients to recount their personal encounters with Atlas, from their fear of apocalypse to their joy at seeing humanity united. By retelling, they transformed chaos into lessons of growth, and so, from Tokyo to New York, from Cape Town to Buenos Aires, people learned to forgive both themselves and one another. To forgive the panic that had once divided societies, to forgive the arguments that had fractured communities, to forgive even the failures of science, because after all, they realized Atlas had not come to divide, but to illuminate, to force humanity to look at its wounds and to learn the art of healing. Within this contemplative quiet, awakening began to take root. Humanity realized that the journey with Atlas was never just about discovering a celestial body. It was, in truth, a form of collective therapy. It forced us to confront our own fragility, but at the same time opened the possibility that within that fragility lay hidden strength. And so, Atlas by its very silence had become the greatest of teachers, a teacher who never lectured, but whose quiet presence made the students grow. By 2029, as Atlas all but vanished from sight, a strange emptiness opened across the night sky. Yet instead of feeling loss, humanity began to see that emptiness as a doorway. No longer asking, "What is Atlas?" People now ask, "Where do we go from here?" And that question ignited a new wave of hope, stretching from science to art, from politics to everyday life. In New York, the United Nations convened a special assembly not to argue about data or space missions, but to discuss the future after Atlas. One diplomat declared, "Atlas forced us to speak. Let us not fall silent again now that it has gone." The chamber erupted in agreement, and from that moment a new initiative was born, the Global Hope Accord. Unlike past treaties, this document promised nothing technological, only something profoundly human. That nations would sustain cross-border cooperation, at least in science and education, as a living legacy of Atlas. In universities, a movement called the Atlas Generation took root. Tens of thousands of students enrolled in interdisciplinary studies blending science, philosophy, and art, with the aim not only of understanding the cosmos, but of understanding themselves within it. One Oxford student wrote, "Atlas taught me there are no borders between mathematics and poetry, between physics and philosophy. They are only different languages for the same question." His words spread widely, inspiring a generation to see knowledge as a unified journey, not a divided pursuit. In India, millions joined the Atlas Awakening journey, a community movement encouraging each person to commit to one small change in their daily life. Caring for a tree, setting aside time for meditation, helping a stranger. Small acts, multiplied, became a global effect. People believed this was how to keep alive the flame Atlas had kindled, not in laboratories, but in the human heart. Meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, a team of young engineers announced a bold project, building an artificial intelligence inspired by Atlas not to replace humans, but to reflect humanity's deepest questions to itself. They called it Silent Oracle. Unlike traditional AI, it would not provide direct answers, but instead pose probing, open-ended questions, forcing users to think. "We want to create a tool that makes people reflect, not just search," one engineer explained. Strangely, even within reverence and fear, hope continued to grow. People worried that one day another celestial body might appear, bearing even harsher, more terrifying questions. Yet instead of retreating, humanity learned to prepare itself. Psychologists named this resilience Atlas immunity. The idea that after surviving such an emotional earthquake, people were stronger, more ready for whatever mysteries might follow. In culture, Atlas became the emblem of unfinished journeys. A Mexican novelist published The Vanishing Star, about a girl who glimpses Atlas one last time and decides to become an astronaut. An African band released the song We Will Go Further, sung in multiple local languages, which spread across the globe as an anthem of hope. An Italian director produced the documentary Atlas, The Inner Journey, focusing not on telescopes, but on ordinary lives changed by the comet. Across the planet, people realized Atlas had not left behind answers, but something greater, a spiritual energy, the energy of hope and awakening. Because of it, new space missions were planned, global treaties were signed, and, most importantly, individuals found reasons to live more fully. And so, though Atlas had faded into the distance, it remained alive, in language, in art, in science, and in the smallest daily decisions. Humanity entered a new era, an age of living with the question, not with despair, but with hope. As 2029 drew to a close, Atlas had all but vanished from civilian telescopes. Only the most powerful observatories could still capture its faint halo at the edge of the dark, while for most of humanity it existed only as memory. And yet, paradoxically, Atlas had never been more present. It no longer occupied the physical sky, but had shifted into the inner sky of the human spirit. In Rome, an exhibition titled Atlas Within Us opened its doors. Visitors stepped into dim rooms where nothing was displayed except mirrors. Etched across each mirror were the words, "Atlas never disappeared. It lives in your gaze." Thousands of people stood before their own reflections, staring into their eyes, and wept. They understood that Atlas was no longer an object out there, but had become an existential mirror, reflecting their very being. In Peru, high in the Andes, indigenous communities held a final ceremony to bid farewell to Atlas. They gathered around bonfires, telling stories of the comet as if it were an ancestor. One elder declared, "We once thought Atlas came from out there, but in truth, it came to awaken what is within us." His words echoed through the cold mountain night, becoming a chant passed down like a song of remembrance, tying Atlas to the belief that it would live on as spiritual memory. In major cities, a new social phenomenon spread: Atlas moments. People used the phrase to describe those sudden silences while looking at the night sky, or facing themselves when they felt an invisible connection to something greater. On social media, millions posted, "I just had an Atlas moment." No one needed to define it precisely, yet everyone understood. It was a fusion of awe, healing, hope, and awakening. In academia, many declared that Atlas had launched a new philosophical era. It was no longer only the existentialism of the 20th century, nor merely the science of the 21st, but a synthesis. Knowledge, spirit, and humanity gathered around the same table. A professor of philosophy at Cambridge wrote, "Atlas was that rare event that turned all of humanity into the students of a silent teacher, and we graduated by admitting that we still know nothing." On a personal level, millions said their lives had changed. A mother in Brazil confessed that after Atlas, she spent evenings stargazing with her child instead of drowning in endless news. A young engineer in South Korea quit a high-paying job to pursue philosophy. A doctor in Egypt admitted that Atlas made him treat his patients with more tenderness because he had realized the fragility of every life. These small stories, woven together, formed a larger tapestry. Atlas had transformed the way humanity approached existence itself. And then came the collective awakening. People no longer needed Atlas to remain in the sky in order with it. It had become part of humanity's shared memory, carved forever into history. What began as an astronomical phenomenon had evolved into a cultural symbol. From a distant speck of light, it had become an inner star. As the new year dawned, a young Canadian writer published an essay in the press. Atlas never truly vanished. It only changed its orbit from the outer heavens into the orbit of our hearts, and perhaps that was its true journey. The piece was translated into over 30 languages, printed in newspapers worldwide, and embraced as the closing line of a turbulent yet transformative decade. Atlas, the drifting comet of ice and dust, had left humanity, not with data, not with formulas, but with a condition of profound reflection. It had taught people to revere the cosmos, to heal after crisis, to rediscover hope, and to awaken to the truth that sometimes silence is the most perfect answer of all. And so, when Atlas departed, it left behind not a void but another kind of sky, a sky that now stretched within every human being,